Sup folks, welcome to the part 11, of What If Deku Become a Healer Hero, Chapter 29. Waking up at 5 AM is an unpleasant task for everyone involved. Even prim and prompt Ida cannot prevent the yawns that escape from his mouth as they gather in the field outside. Shinsu rests his chin on Izuku's head and drowsily leans against him, and the smaller boy is too tired to push him off. Aizawa, somehow, seems entirely unbothered by the early hour as he goes over the day's training regime in a monotonous voice. He has Kaken do the same ball toss as he did on the first day of school, and then essentially goes on to tell them that their quirks are weak. They'll be pushing their quirks to their limits to make them stronger. It'll be so hard you'll feel like dying, Aizawa says with a maniacal grin, but try not to actually die. Everyone shivers, except for Izuku, who just gives Aizawa a very unimpressed look. Yes please. He sniffs. Thus begins the training camp from hell. The rest of the wild pussycats arrive, and with their diverse quirks, they're able to provide each and every one of the students with the perfect exercise to improve their quirk. It's very intense training, and Izuku is desperate to keep an eye on everyone. Quirk overuse is no joke, but Aizawa has him spend most of his time sparring with Shinsu. The purple-haired boy has progressed in leaps and bounds during Izuku's absence in their lessons with Aizawa, so it's a good opportunity for him to catch up on what he's missed. And he's missed a lot, turns out. It's a bit frustrating, knowing that Shinsu has been learning and getting stronger while Izuku has just been stuck at home resting. He was already starting to catch up with Izuku skill-wise in hand-to-hand combat simply because he's able to train more often with Aizawa. But it really shows now. Izuku grunts when Shinsu flips him onto his back and pins him to the ground. A moment later, his weight shifts off him and he's helping him up, but Izuku is all too aware of the way Aizawa not so subtly eyes them the entire time. You alright? Shinsu asks. Fine, Izuku wheezes, brushing the dirt off his pants. Shinsu pauses. We can take a break no. Izuku stifles a cough, ignoring the way his throat burns. Keep going. He raises his arms and Shinsu reluctantly falls back into a fighting stance. They keep sparring, and Izuku can immediately tell that Shinsu is going easy on him. A flash of irritation sparks in his chest. Quickly switching to the offensive, he darts forward and takes him down, probably a bit more harshly than he needs to. Shinsu coughs as the air is knocked out of his lungs. He sits up on his elbows and arches an eyebrow at Izuku. The freckled boy puts his hands on his hips, not quite glaring down at Shinsu, but giving him a hard look as if to say don't act like I don't know what you're doing. Shinsu is different from his other friends. He's kind, but he isn't afraid to be blunt and straightforward even if it might seem rude. He's a lot like Aizawa in that regard. And he's the last person Izuku would expect to treat him with kid gloves. One of the reasons Izuku loves their sparring sessions so much is that he gets all sweaty and bruised. Everyone else always treats him like he's fragile, but Shinsu has never seemed to be afraid to punch him too hard. Maybe it's because Izuku had so much more experience in fighting than Shinsu that the other boy had to work so hard just to land a hit on him, that why the hell would he want to hold back? Whatever the reason is, Izuku needs him to remember it right now. As he gazes down at Shinsu on the ground, Izuku arches a brow and thinks to himself, don't you go forgetting who your second teacher was. Just because I'm in a funk doesn't mean you get to go easy on me. He stretches out his hand. After a moment, Shinsu smirks and takes it. Then, he starts fighting for real. Izuku immediately finds himself on the defensive. Shinsu's a real bitch to fight nowadays, using his height and his long limbs to his advantage. While his swings and kicks were once too wide and therefore much easier to see and dodge, now they're quick and controlled. Because he took Izuku's advice. What an ass. Izuku should be proud of him. He is proud of him. He reminds himself of this every time Shinsu knocks him down. He's only able to do so because Izuku helped teach him. And it's not like Izuku's completely getting his ass kicked here. He swipes Shinsu's feet out from underneath him and pins him down plenty of times. He's just being moody because Shinsu's winning more than he usually does. It's like he's progressing so fast and Izuku's just not. Is he getting any stronger? All his other classmates are training their quirks, but there's not much he can do for his right now, considering the circumstances. He supposes Shinsu is in the same boat, although maybe he can help him train his quirk later. But all he can do is train his body. That's what he and Shinsu are doing, but Shinsu's progressing a lot faster than him for some reason. Why? Izuku was only out of action for 2 weeks, and yeah, Shinsu does get to train with Aizawa pretty much every day after school, but Izuku has been taking self-defense classes for years. Or, well, he was. So, what's different? Is he just in a funk? Maybe he needs to find himself a stronger sparring partner. Maybe Aizawa. Someone that can teach him new things. Someone that can help him progress more. Or maybe he's just weak? The traitorous thought distracts him, allowing Shinsu to land a kick to the side of his head that he normally would have been able to dodge easily. Shinsu clearly expected him to too, because he startles when Izuku is knocked to the ground and rushes over to him. "Midoriya-kun," he exclaims, dropping to his knees beside him. "Shit, are you alright? I'm so sorry, I thought you'd dodge that." Dazed, Izuku pushes himself up on his elbow and lifts a hand to his head, wincing in pain. All around him, everything seems to stop. People nearby glance over. Students from Class A and B stop what they're doing, stop their training, just to look over at him, just to worry about him because of course it's poor little Izuku that got hurt again. Lord knows he'd break like glass if he doesn't have someone protecting him. Heavy footsteps brush against gravel. "Midoriya-kun." "Shit. I'm fine," Izuku croaks, broken and hoarse. Aizawa's shoes enter his line of view and then the man is kneeling in front of him, tilting his chin up to peer into his eyes. Izuku turns his chin away. He's not a concussion. He's had a concussion before. In fact, Aizawa's seen the one and only concussion he's ever had, and this isn't one. Still, Aizawa stubbornly grabs his chin and forces him to look at him again, going through all the motions of checking for a concussion before he's finally satisfied. "Take a break," he orders gruffly. "I'm fine," Izuku insists. "That wasn't a suggestion." Aizawa narrows his eyes. "What did I say about pushing yourself?" Izuku tries to glare, but quickly shrivels and averts his gaze. After a long moment, Aizawa says, "It's no good fighting when you're distracted. Take a break, ice your head, and get back to it later." His tone leaves no room for argument. Izuku watches as the teacher straightens up and leaves, then clumsily gets to his feet with the help of Shinsu. "Sorry," the purple-haired boy apologizes again. "It's fine," Izuku grunts. "Oi, Shinsu-kun, take it easy on him." A boy from Class B shouts over to them. "Sorry," Shinsu says louder. Izuku stifles a grumble and turns on his heel. He starts heading back to the facility and Shinsu follows, probably to keep an eye on him even though he's walking fine. He knows his friend means well, but he can't help the bitter indignation that burns deep within his chest. Other students deal with plenty worse injuries and don't get nearly as much fussing over. "So," Shinsu says, coming up to walk by his side. Izuku glances at him, and the taller boy arches a brow questioningly. "Are you distracted?" Izuku blinks. "You're frustrated about something. I can tell." Izuku frowns at his feet. "I'm fine," he mumbles. "Is that all you can say?" Izuku's eye twitches. He rounds on Shinsu. "Well, what do you want me to say?" Shinsu appears unfazed by his unusual hostility. "How about the truth?" He smirks teasingly. "Don't make me use my quirk on you. Why you just ga?" Izuku is too upset and frustrated to deal with this right now. He whirls around and stops into the facility, grimacing in pain from both his head and his throat. "Go away. Go back to your training. I don't need your help putting an ice pack on my head." He slams the door unnecessarily loudly behind him. By the time dinner arrives, Izuku is a little ashamed of his behavior during the afternoon. Even though he's frustrated at, well, his lack of progress in his physical ability, taking it out on Shinsu was very inappropriate and rude. Shinsu's his friend. He doesn't deserve to be treated that way. After icing his head and giving himself time to cool down, he'd gone back to continue sparring, only to see Aizawa training Shinsu's quirk with a few other students. So he'd kind of just hung around until dinner time, during which he'd seen Shinsu and Aizawa speaking in hushed voices, glancing at him occasionally. Great. Shinsu probably told Aizawa about Izuku's little temper tantrum. His behavior this afternoon was so out of character, they'll probably take it as evidence that he's not ready for this, that it's too soon, he needs more time to recover. But he doesn't, he's fine, he's just acting this way because everyone's treating him like he's made of glass. However, when Shinsu comes to sit down next to him at the dinner table, all he says is, "Tomorrow, I'm gonna catch you up on the new capture weapon moves Aizawa-sensei taught me while you were gone. Think that'll be okay with your throat?" Oh. He panicked over nothing. Izuku blinks, gives himself a mental shake, and nods. Oh. Yeah, that should be okay, I think. He later notices that Kota has wandered off during dinner time, and just like before, Mandalay makes no move to follow him, so Izuku takes the initiative and follows the boy's footsteps up the mountain, taking a plate of curry with him. He's met with less hostility than before, although Kota clearly wants to be left alone and denies being hungry. This leads to Izuku going on a very long rant about the importance of food to young growing boys, using as many big words as he can, until Kota gets annoyed and caves. Alright, fine. He snaps irritably, just leave it there. Smiling in victory, Izuku bends over and sets down the plate a couple of feet away from Kota, who glares at him with more anger than a 5-year-old should have. He's about to turn away when Kota suddenly snaps, "I don't get you." Izuku blinks and glances back at him. "Huh? I saw you today," Kota says accusingly. "You have a healing quirk, but you were out there trying to fight like you're some sort of hero." "Oh," Izuku says, "healers have to be good at fighting too. For self-defense, you know? In case we ever get attacked by villains." Kota pauses for a moment, digesting his answer, then his eyes harden again. "But you did. And you got hurt and your voice is all weird now. You got injured cause of the hero's failure, you should hate them. Why would you use your quirk to help them?" Ah. Izuku understands now. From what Mandalay told him, Kota seems to have an intense hatred for heroes that's no doubt uncommon for boys his age. Or, for anyone, really. He's looking for a kindred spirit here. But he won't find one in Izuku. "I don't blame the heroes for my injury, I blame the villains," he says simply. He hesitates for a brief moment, then adds, "I heard about what happened to your parents." Kota tenses up. "It was an unfortunate incident. I remember it." Kota grits his teeth. Everyone's crazy. Calling each other stupid names, like hero and villain, and killing each other. Talking about quirks and stuff. It's because they're all showing off that they ended up like that. Stupid. Izuku looks up at the dark sky glittering with stars, pondering. The life of a hero is a dangerous one, he muses, and it probably seems reckless to some. But I guess that's why I want to help them. To make sure that what happened to your parents never happens to anyone else. You can't promise that. Kota whispers. "No," Izuku admits. "But I can try." With that, he turns and leaves. While they're getting ready for bed, Izuku finds himself massaging Kaken's sore wrists. Even though he's not allowed to use his quirk to heal his classmates, Aizawa said nothing about using traditional methods. Thanks to Shinsu kicking him in the head earlier, he doesn't have to worry about his quirk activating from skin contact. Kaken's head nearly lolls as Izuku applies firm pressure with one thumb and slides it up his inner forearm. "I've never seen Bakugo-kun so chilled before," Ojiro whispers to Shinsu. "SHH. You'll ruin the moment." Sero shushes. "Fuck off, you fuckers," Kaken growls, but it comes out more like a moan. His head finally slumps against Izuku's shoulder as he works his way up the blonde's tense forearms. The other boys snicker. A weak, muffled fuck you comes from Izuku's shoulder. Is this how you tame him, Midoriya-kun? Shinsa asks. A curious tactic, Ida comments thoughtfully. Todoroki pauses as he walks by and glances down at Kaken practically melted in Izuku's lap. He blinks. Can I get one, next? Just the thought of giving Todoroki a massage sends Izuku's mind to no land and he immediately flushes, but thankfully Kaken tightens his grip on Izuku and grumbles, "Fuck you, he's mine." Actually, Izuku says, trying to glance around as much as he can with Kaken's puffy hair pressing against his face, not a bad idea. Is there anyone with injuries I can possibly help through traditional means? There are a few boys missing, namely Kirishima, Kaminari, and Sato, since they failed the final exams, but they didn't seem too injured last Izuku saw. Izuku is a bit worried about the effects of quirk overuse for Kaminari though. Sorry Aizawa, but Izuku doesn't really think hooking a teenage boy up to a car battery is a valid form of training. But whatever, what does Izuku know, anyway? It's not like he's been religiously studying the human body for the past year. He's absolutely certain that the guy that couldn't even pronounce sternocleidomastoid correctly totally knows what he's doing when he's talking about electrocuting a 15-year-old's brain. Sure. He really needs to have a talk with that man, doesn't he? He'll add it to the growing plate of things he needs to do. You already gave me some more anti-nausea pills, monsieur. Aoyama says, I am doing as well as I can be, otherwise. Sero rubs his elbows gingerly. Do you have any Vaseline or lotion I can put on my elbows? My quirk makes him dry out. Izuku nods and detangles himself from Kaken, who grumpily flops down on his futon in defeat, and retrieves the Vaseline from his medical pouch. Shinsa saunters up to Ida and wraps an arm around his shoulders, leaning his weight against him. I'm sure Ida-kun would love a leg massage, but he's too polite to ask for one. He gives a toothy smirk when the blue-haired boy sputters. Izuku pauses. Ida has been running around all day. So, he ends up kneeling down in front of an awkward Ida who insists that he doesn't have to do this, and Izuku has to remind him multiple times that dude, it's my job to look after you guys, shut up, while he massages his legs. It's a bit odd to see the exhaust pipes sticking out of his friend's calves up close, but Ida seems to appreciate the massage once he actually manages to start relaxing after a few minutes. His poor muscles are probably so overworked, and he's going to have to do this all over again tomorrow. He'll have to be careful not to get any cramps. Izuku also ends up massaging Ojiro's tail, which is a whole other experience all of its own. Once he's finished treating the boys, he politely knocks on the girls' door and asks if they need any treatment as well. They're a bit better off, although once they hear about the massages, he's guilt-tripped into rubbing a few of their shoulders. If the whole healer thing doesn't work out, he should become a masseuse. Afterwards, it's nearing bedtime and Izuku knows he should be heading back to the boys' room, but he hesitates. Class B worked just as hard as Class A did today. It seems unfair that he would treat his own classmates and not them. So, with his medical bag in hand, he makes his way over to Class B's side of the facility. He manages to find Kendo, who greets him warmly and helps him gather up her classmates when he tells her his intentions. The Class B students are nice, but it's a little strange. He supposes he doesn't really interact with them very often, but they practically swarm around him, gazing at him like he's so fascinating, or like he's a cute puppy that was just dropped off at their feet. It's a little overwhelming, and very confusing, but at least they're friendly. Izuku's too tired to try and figure out how the hero student mind works right now. He hasn't even figured it out with his own classmates yet. When he returns to the boys' shared room, it's past their bedtime and the lights are out. He's about to consider taking out his phone to help light the way to his futon when, suddenly a small flame erupts from the center of the room. Todoroki. His flame provides just enough light for Izuku to pick his way across the dark room without stepping on any of his sleeping friends. "Thanks," Izuku whispers as he sets his bag down next to his futon, getting under the covers. Todoroki nods, shrinking the flame so that it's smaller, more like a soft candlelight between them. "You're lucky none of the pussycats caught you on your way back." "And what would they have done?" Izuku scoffed slightly, rolling his eyes. "I'm a healer, I get to get away with stuff." He grins teasingly. Todoroki's soft smile is illuminated by the dim light of his flame. "You sure do," he whispers. Before Izuku can ponder what he means by that, the flame disappears. "Get some sleep." Without the fire, darkness descends once more, thick and heavy. Once Izuku's eyes adjust, however, he can see the dim outline of Todoroki's form laying in his futon next to him. He's still facing Izuku, eyelids closed and expression lax. Izuku swallows and rolls over to face Kaken instead. Red eyes meet his. "Gay," Kaken mouths with a silent sneer. Izuku kicks him in the shin and rolls over to face Todoroki, buries his head underneath his blanket, and somehow forces himself to fall asleep. Izuku wakes up feeling very warm. His blankets are a heavy, comfortable weight around him that practically radiate heat. He shifts slightly, noticing that one side is noticeably cooler. Inhaling deeply, that's such a nice, musky scent. What detergent did his mom use to wash his blankets with ? Izuku wraps his arms around his warm bundle of blankets and tugs it closer to his chest. Only, it feels kind of firm for a blanket. Izuku drowsily splays his hands out, fingers trailing around. Feels like fabric. His sleep-handled mind can process that much, but what's underneath it is hard. Warm, but hard. He presses a little. There's some give to it, but not much. He opens his eyes. Can't see much. He tries to move. Can't move much. Actually, can't move at all. His blanket is too heavy for some reason. Izuku blinks rapidly, trying to get used to the dim light. It must be early morning. There's a faint dawn glow peeking in through the windows, but there's also something really close to his face, which is making it hard to see. He turns his chin, blinking in the low light, and nearly has a heart attack. His blanket is not in fact a blanket, but an arm. A beautiful, bare, muscular arm belonging to Todoroki, who he is currently tangled with. His breath hitches in his throat and he immediately freezes like a deer caught in headlights. Todoroki's face is so close to his. He can feel Todoroki's breath puff against his curls from where his head is pillowed against the boy's disgustingly comfortable bicep. Izuku gulps, struggling not to panic. But that's an impossible task, because he's now realizing how the rest of their bodies are positioned. Todoroki's left arm, the one not underneath Izuku's head, is loosely flung across his side. Izuku's own arm is curled a bit more daintily around Todoroki's ribcage, which he tries to remove, except Todoroki's arm is kind of on top of it, so he'll notice if he tries to move it. Their legs are a whole other story. Izuku doesn't think his face could burn any hotter. Actually, this whole situation is way too hot in general. And not in a sexy way. Todoroki is like a furnace, and Izuku is so embarrassed he's literally sweating. Hey, maybe he'll sweat so much he'll be able to slip out of Todoroki's grasp, because honestly that might be the only way he'll be able to get out of this one, because oh my god, his leg is trapped in between Todoroki's thighs. Literally, his thigh is like 1 inch away from being pressed against his crush's crotch. Can someone please kill him now? And there's no escaping this. He knows that. You wanna know how he knows that? Because those thighs he was fawning over looking at during the endurance training at the pool? Yeah, he can feel just how muscular and strong they are now, and holy shit, they would be so attractive if they weren't also going to be his demise. Izuku takes a deep, shuddering breath, then curses himself when he exhales too hard on Todoroki's collarbone. Will Todoroki even wake up if he breathes too hard on him? He doesn't know, and he doesn't want to find out. How the hell did they even end up like this? He glances at dim light pouring through the window. It doesn't matter. He just needs to get out of this before anyone wakes up. Preferably also without Todoroki waking up. Yesterday's training was super tough, so he should sleep like a rock, right? This shouldn't be too hard. Swallowing, Izuku holds his breath and slowly, ever so slowly, shifts backwards. Todoroki doesn't react. Izuku pauses, then shifts, again, this time moving his head a little too. He doesn't dare move his thigh yet. Todoroki is silent. Izuku gets a bit braver and slides a little further out of his grasp. Todoroki suddenly inhales deeply and Izuku tenses up. Then those arms are wrapping around him and pulling him flush against Todoroki's chest once more. Hot breath washes over his scalp as a nose nuzzles against his curls. The leg that's thrown over his own lazily hooks around his calf, and the arms around him gently squeeze once before relaxing. Todoroki takes another deep breath, and then his breathing evens out again. Blood pulses in Izuku's ears as a million cuss words run through his mind. Shit, 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 why does Todoroki have to be such an octopus when he sleeps? It seems so out of character. He's never really been one for any type of physical affection, let alone cuddling. See, if it were anyone else, Izuku might not mind it. They could laugh it off. But this is Todoroki. Not only would it totally make things weird between them, but Todoroki would never be able to live it down if the others woke up and saw him Mr. Tough Guy, top of the class Todoroki cuddling with Izuku. And Kaken would be laughing at both of them for ages. So with those fears to spur him onward, he tries again to wiggle out of the other boy's grasp without waking him. After a moment, the arms around him tighten, and a low, warning growl rumbles in Todoroki's chest. Izuku freezes. What the fuck? What the fuck was that noise? Izuku didn't even know Todoroki could make that noise. It almost sounds downright possessive, and Izuku can't help but shiver in Todoroki's hold. The arms around him move, the left sliding up to press a hand between Izuku's shoulder blades and the other sliding lower to Izuku's waist. The freckled boy tenses up when the right hand trails over his hip. Instinctively, he flinches away, but Todoroki's muscular thighs keep his leg trapped firmly between them. The hand between Izuku's shoulder blades practically burns. Izuku bites his lip. He can feel the strength in that forearm pressed against his back, keeping him pinned against Todoroki's chest. Even in his sleep, Todoroki is so strong, so beautiful, and Izuku is so weak for him. Todoroki then lets out a content sigh, sounding very much like a satisfied feline that has found the perfect patch of sun to bask in, and is more than content to lay there all day. Which is adorable, except Izuku needs him to move. Being totally honest with himself, if they weren't surrounded by their sleeping classmates, and if he wasn't terrified that this might ruin their friendship, then yeah, sue him. He would love to stay here and let himself be cuddled by sleepy octopus Todoroki. Seriously, he is so fucking cute right now. But unfortunately, Izuku can't let something bad come of this, so he's gotta be the one to pry himself away from his clingy, sleepy, beautiful crush that he's totally going to be dreaming of in this scenario for a few weeks after this. Beep 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 fuck. Izuku all but launches himself away from Todoroki, legs getting tangled up in the blankets and tripping him up, causing him to fall, face first into Kaken's futon. Kaken lets out a strangled yelp as the air is knocked out of him and immediately starts screeching. Izuku, what the fuck? Sorry, Kaken. Izuku jumps off, then falls over, his legs still caught up in Todoroki's blanket. A pissed off Kaken pounces on him, rolling them both over onto the Gurinet's futon where he pins him down and snarls. Izuku gulps. Kaken, when sleep deprived, is not one to be messed with. The fuck are you doing? He snaps irritably, the volume of his voice matching the noisy shrieking of the alarm clock that pierces the sleepy silence of the room. Nothing. Izuku croaks, then winces. SHH, Kaken, not so loud. Meanwhile, everyone else is still groggily trying to wake up. Todoroki included. Lucky for him, though, he apparently got a head start when Izuku kicked him awake in his haste to get away from him. He pushes himself up on his elbows now, blinking at Kaken pinning down Izuku next to him in confusion. When his gaze meets Izuku's, he pauses. Then he frowns. A spark of hope flickers in Izuku's chest. But then, Todoroki's eyes widen in utter horror. A light flush blooms across his cheeks, and Izuku's stomach sinks. No. Kaken is still glaring down at him, but when he sees the change in his expression, he follows his gaze to Todoroki. Noticing the lack of blanket on the other boy, Kaken turns his glare back to Izuku and looks down at his legs, which are still tangled up. Looks at the blanket beneath Izuku, the one that actually belongs to him. Izuku watches with dread as Kaken connects the dots. It takes him a moment, because his mind is still pretty groggy with sleep. The scowl slowly fades away, replaced by shock. For a brief second, Izuku thinks he sees a flash of rage flicker across Kaken's eyes, but it disappears the next moment. Then, he tosses his head back and lets out a bark of laughter. Kaken. Izuku hisses, but his best friend ignores him, keeping him pinned as he leans back on his haunches and laughs, loud and obnoxious. Todoroki glares while the other boys, still in the midst of waking up, yawn and blink at him in confusion. Someone slaps off the screeching alarm clock. "Bakubro?" Kirishima asks sleepily, rubbing an eye. "What's going on, man? Why are you on top of Midoriya-kun?" Ida frowns as he puts on his glasses. Kaken just shakes his head as he comes down from his laughter. Still chuckling, he curls his lip and leers at Todoroki, baring his teeth in a silent challenge. Despite his apparent humor, his eyes burn. Todoroki just keeps glaring. Shifting uncomfortably beneath Kaken's weight, Izuku sits up and pushes at his chest. "Kaken, come on," just he squeaks when Kaken pushes him back down with one hand before standing up. The blonde steps over to Todoroki, who makes to stand up as well, except Kaken puts one foot on the boy's chest and forces him back down before bending over to sneer, "Don't get too comfortable, icy hot." He flashes Todoroki a feral grin, then ruffles Izuku's hair with a bit more force than necessary as he walks past to grab his stuff from beside his futon before he stalks out the door. Silence fills the room. "What just happened?" Kaminari asks drowsily, still wiping the sleep from his eyes. Izuku glances at Todoroki, who's still glaring after Kaken. His eyes land back on the blankets loosely tangled around his ankles, and a blush creeps up his neck. Stupid hero types. They're all stupidly possessive and competitive and hot-blooded and stupid and confusing and stupid and charming and aggressive, and stupid and AGH. Izuku yanks his own blanket over his head and buries his face into his pillow, stifling a groan. Izuku spends a rather disappointing morning training with his capture weapon. He'd never really been good at using it before his injury. Aizawa had barely begun teaching him how to use it, but it seems that during his 2 weeks of rest, Shinsu progressed ahead of him even in this. It's not even that complicated of a move, they're just taking turns tossing and hooking their weapons around each other from a distance, but it's clear that Izuku's struggling a lot more than Shinsu is. He's always seemed to struggle more with the capture weapon than Shinsu. He blames it on the fact that it's the one thing they're starting on the same level on, and Shinsu's getting more practice with. Still, it's frustrating, but he tries to swallow it down and forces himself to be patient and listen when Aizawa comes over and helps him. They switch back to sparring during the afternoon. And once again, even though he has more experience, he keeps getting his ass kicked. The frustration mounts, making him slip up in his desperation to focus even harder, and Shinsu notices, taking advantage of every single instance of his distraction to knock him off his feet. After about the 9th time this happens, he doesn't let him back up, instead keeping him pinned to the ground. For a few moments, he simply pants above Izuku, purple strands of hair clinging to sweaty skin as he gazes down at him with piercing eyes. Then, "What's up? Huh?" Izuku squints up at him. The hot sun is beating down on them, but Shinsu casts a shadow over him. "What are you doing?" The taller boy blinks lazily. "You've been acting weird lately, and you're fighting sloppy as shit." "What's up?" A spark of annoyance flickers in Izuku's chest. "Nothing." He squirms. "Get off." Shinsu keeps him pinned. "Make me." He smirks, arching a brow as he gazes down at Izuku through hooded eyes, looking entirely unconcerned, and Izuku hates that. He hates that he can look at him that way, like Izuku's not even enough of a threat for Shinsu to be on guard, because why would anyone ever feel threatened by Izuku? He's just a healer, he doesn't have a combative quirk, he can't even protect himself, let alone hurt anyone. Rage pulses through his veins and he surges forwards, catching Shinsu by surprise as he flips the heavier boy over, switching their positions. Izuku reels his fist back and Shinsu's eyes widen, hastily catching his fist before it makes contact with his nose. A knee jams into Izuku's back and he yelps. Shinsu quickly hooks a leg under Izuku's knee and grabs his shoulder before using his lighter weight against him and throwing him off of him. Now separated, they both hurriedly scramble to their feet. Still trembling with fury and indignation, Izuku immediately goes on the offensive and darts forward. Shinsu blocks his punch and aims a kick to his side that he dodges before attacking again. He's relentless, fueled by adrenaline and frustration and an underlying, sickening ball of fear that sits like a rock in the pit of his stomach, and he forces Shinsu to remain on the defensive because he knows that it's one of his weaker areas. But Izuku's not used to being on the offensive for so long either. His style of fighting is more evasive, to stay quick on his feet and out of his opponent's range, only darting in for brief, quick attacks. It's a good fighting style for someone short and agile like him, but all he can think now is it's not good enough, not strong enough. He needs to be stronger, he needs to be stronger. Shinsu is watching him carefully, some calculating look glistening in those periwinkle depths. Izuku can't read his expression, but he feels set off anyway, like he's exposed, vulnerable, and it makes him react with hostility. In a sudden burst of energy, Izuku launches himself at the taller boy, intending to use his momentum to knock him over. Shinsu, however, anticipates this, and braces himself properly, grabbing onto Izuku when he crashes into him and swinging him around in a graceful movement. Then, Shinsu is forcing Izuku to the ground, and the two wrestle with each other for the next few minutes. Limbs flail, hair is pulled, and dust flies into the air as the boys roll around in the dirt. Shinsu grunts when Izuku's fist sloppily punches his cheek and grabs it. Izuku snarls and tries to yank his hand back, but Shinsu refuses to let go, rolling so that the smaller boy is pinned beneath him. "Get off!" Izuku hisses, frustrated tears pricking his eyes. "No," Shinsu says, blocking the other fist that comes flying towards his face. He grabs it and pins both hands beside Izuku's head. Izuku grunts and struggles to push back, but he's at a disadvantage both position and strength-wise. Still, he continues to thrash around stubbornly for a few minutes, Shinsu holding him with an iron grip and waiting patiently. Eventually, the fight begins to ebb out of him and his breath hitches. Da. Damn it. Izuku hiccups, tears streaming down the sides of his face. Damn it, damn it, damn it. His chest heaves as he gasps for breath. He glares unseeingly at Shinsu's chest through blurry, wet eyes as he grits his teeth. If I can't beat you, then how am I ever going to beat? He cuts himself off, but Shinsu heard. "Beat who?" Shinsu asks. Izuku turns his head away, but Shinsu squeezes his wrists and peers down at him intently. "Beat who? I don't know." Izuku cries out brokenly. I just need to beat." He tries to wiggle his arms free, to bring them to his face, to hide behind them, but Shinsu still won't let him go. A pathetic whine of frustration escapes him. "I just need to be strong." Shinsu frowns. Izuku averts his gaze, hiccuping and struggling to control the tears pouring out of his eyes. I don't like making my FR friends worry about me. I wanna be able to get strong. Show 'em that I'm not as fragile and helpless as they think I am. When Shinsu's jaw drops a little. Midoriya-kun, they don't think that. Yes they do. Izuku insists, they do. They always think that. You do too. You were going easy on me yesterday. Yeah, 'cause you're just coming back from recovering from a life-threatening injury. Shinsu says defensively, you would have gone easy on me too if our roles had been reversed. And besides, I stopped when you made it clear that you didn't appreciate me taking it easy on you. Izuku opens his mouth to retort, then just groans, okay, well, but it's not just that. It's just, this is like my entire life. My mother, Kaken, everyone always acts like I'm this precious little thing that needs to be protected at all times, and I get it. I understand. Part of me is flattered and charmed that I have such protective hero friends, but damn it, don't you understand how that can also be just a little bit insulting? I'm not made of glass, you know. Treating me like I am won't make me any stronger. I just. Gah. He lets out a frustrated noise that sends a jolt of pain through his abused throat. The adrenaline vanishes entirely, leaving him trembling beneath Shinsu as he gasps for breath. You all looked so sad, he wheezes, his voice breaking on the last word, when you heard my voice. After I came out of the hospital. You were all blaming yourselves and I'm so sorry. His breath hitches, tears squeezing out of his eyes. I never want you to blame yourself for me being weak. And you're so strong, Shinsu-kun, and I want to be strong too so they don't have to worry anymore. His words make more sense in his head than they do out loud and he finds himself trailing off, sniffling pathetically. Shinsu is quiet for a long time, watching him as he struggles to compose himself. You know, he finally says, then pauses. He opens his mouth, hesitates, then continues, they're always going to worry about you no matter what. Izuku lets out a frustrated sigh, but before he can say anything, Shinsu adds, just like you'll always worry about them no matter how strong they get. It's not an insult to their strength, it's just you worrying about them because you're their friend and you care about them. Izuku gazes up at him tiredly, tongue feeling heavy in his mouth, tilting his head. Shinsu admits, I know it probably feels different, and it probably is, a bit but they're not trying to be insulting. You know that. I know. Izuku mumbles, I just wish they would trust me. Trust you? Shinsu questions. Trust me. To be able to handle myself. Shinsu pauses. Can you handle yourself? Taken aback, Izuku blinks up at him. Shinsu sighs through his nose. I won't pretend to understand that part. I've always been able to rely on my quirk to defend myself with. But your quirk not only is non-combative, but also makes you a target. I can't imagine how vulnerable that must make you feel. Izuku gazes up at him in awe. Shinsu notices all that? He's never seemed particularly empathetic. Listen, it's good that you wanna get strong. But you should do it for the right reasons. Do it for you. He releases Izuku's wrist to boop him on the nose, making him smile a bit. Shinsu smirks. And hey, never underestimate the power of being underestimated. If your opponent is stupid enough to assume that you're weak, take advantage of that. Izuku sniffles, taking a deep, shuddering breath. Shinsu watches him with solemn eyes, smirk, slowly fading. He doesn't ask out loud, but Izuku can hear the silent question of are you alright now? Loud and clear. Blinking away tears, Izuku gives him a wobbly smile. Thanks, he croaks. Honestly, Shinsu didn't really tell him anything that Izuku didn't know deep down, but it felt good to get that all off his chest. He definitely still has some issues to work out, but for now. Shinsu dusts off his clothes as he climbs to his feet, Izuku wincing as he rubs his numb wrists. He glances over at Aizawa, who is very pointedly not looking their way. So. Shinsu drawls, "Wanna go again?" Izuku sputters incredulously, "Seriously?" Shinsu shrugs nonchalantly. "I almost beat the shit out of you." The other boy ponders, then snickers. "Oh, I'm about to give you a reason to beat the shit out of me." Izuku frowns as Shinsu pauses dramatically. Clears his throat. Then, "So. You and Todoroki-kun, huh?" Izuku freezes, eyes widening in horror. Shinsu gives him a Cheshire grin. He saw. Izuku attacks. And wins. Chapter 30. Later in the evening, Pixie Bob announces that they'll be participating in a test of courage. Class B is already in position in the forest. She says, gesturing with one gloved paw to the dark woods, behind her, "Your job is to pick up the tags with your names from Ragdoll, who will be waiting for you at the middle of the route, and bring them back here. The scarers aren't allowed to make direct contact. Show us how scary you are with your quirks. The class that makes the most people piss their pants with creativity and imagination wins." Tiger adds, much to the distaste of Jiru. Pixie Bob has them draw lots to choose their teams, and with Kaminari, Ashido, Sao, and Kirishima having been dragged away by Aizawa for more remedial classes, Izuku ends up getting paired with Ojiro. The blonde smiles kindly at him and waves him over with his tail. "Midoriya-kun," he greets, "this seems exciting, doesn't it?" Izuku nods. "Why yeah. I don't think I've ever tail." A scowling Kaken suddenly grabs Ojiro's shoulder. "Switch with me." "Huh?" Ojiro blinks. Kaken jerks his thumb at a very unimpressed Todoroki and snarls, "I'm not fucking pairing up with Zuku's boyfriend." Izuku's eyes widen into saucers as his face burns bright red. Todoroki looks equally ruffled, glaring lightly at the back of Kaken's head as Ojiro awkwardly apologizes. I don't think we can switch, partners." Pixie Bob confirms that there is no switching allowed, much to the annoyance of Kaken and the relief of Ojiro that he doesn't have to argue with the blonde. Thankfully, Kaken and Todoroki are one of the first teams to be sent off into the forest, saving Izuku from any further embarrassment. He has yet to talk to Todoroki about the incident this morning. Actually, he hasn't really even been able to look at Todoroki for more than a couple of seconds ever since this morning. How could he? He's never been more embarrassed in his life. It's one thing to cuddle with a childhood friend, but with a crush? And speaking of childhood friends, what the hell was Kaken's behavior this morning? Don't get too comfortable, icy hot? What the hell does that even mean? Unlike with Todoroki, Izuku isn't afraid of confronting Kaken, especially when it comes to pulling his head out of his ass. Things between him and Todoroki are getting a bit too stupidly competitive for Izuku's liking. He'll be sure to give Kaken a talking to and figure out what's going on between them later tonight. Ugh. He vaguely recalls Recovery Girl complaining about Heroes being the death of her and finds himself wholeheartedly agreeing. "Midoriya-kun? You alright?" Ojiro asks, pulling him out of his thoughts. "You're frowning." "Oh, yeah," Izuku rasps, turning to him with a smile, "just thinking." Sero elbows him teasingly. "Don't get lost in your head. That's how you'll freak yourself out. Trust me, I know." "Have you done this before?" Kanda asks. While he never talks as loud as his classmates do, he's certainly a lot more social than before thanks to his vocal training. Sero grins. "Yeah, I did something like this once in middle school. It wasn't for a class, but I was with." He cuts himself off, frowning. "Hey, do you smell that?" Izuku blinks and glances around in confusion. "Smell what?" Pixie Bob notices too. She closes her eyes, nose twitching. "What's this burned scent? Is that black smoke?" Ida's exclaim catches their attention. "Is there a fire on the mountain?" Izuku follows his gaze above the tree line to where plumes of dark smoke are gathering. They rise up from the forest, which seems to be glowing blue instead of orange, covering the starry night sky with pitch-black clouds. Now that Izuku notices it, the stench of smoke is unmistakable. There's movement in the corner of his eye. Suddenly, Pixie Bob is glowing pink and levitating off the ground, flying backwards as if being pulled by something. What is this? Pixie Bob! Mandalay exclaims. Izuku doesn't see what happens next, it all happens so quickly. All he hears is a loud crack, then he's tearing his gaze from the black smoke filling the sky and seeing two large forms standing over Pixie Bob's unconscious body on the ground. Blood pours from a crack in her skull. Izuku's mind skids to a halt. Good evening, high school. A reptilian-looking man greets enthusiastically, stepping over Pixie Bob without a thought. He spreads his arms with a grin and puffs out his chest, announcing with pride, "We are the Vanguard Action Squad of the League of Villains." Izuku's heart plummets to the pit of his stomach. For a moment, everything seems to slow down as his brain struggles to catch up. The League of Villains? Here? But why? They're not supposed to be here. This place was supposed to be safe. I was supposed to make sure this place was safe. Midoriya-kun, get behind me, Ojiro hisses, moving in front of Izuku to hide him with his body. He raises his tail, defensively. Sero and Ida move too, taking protective stances in front of Izuku. They react so quickly, so immediately aware of what's going on that Izuku curses himself for his stupidity. These are villains in front of him, he can't afford to freeze up. This isn't even the first time he's been attacked. And it's not like he didn't know they were after him this time. Sure, this place was supposed to be safe, but they're prepared for this, he's prepared for this. Shall I crush this girl's head? The other villain, the one pinning down Pixie Bob, suggests. What did you think? Well, what do you think? She leers, pressing her magnetic pole down on the heroine's skull down threateningly. Izuku tenses. They're prepared, right? Like I'd let you. Tiger snarls. Wait up, big sis mag. The lizard man interrupts, don't be hasty. To Izuku's surprise, he actually stands between the two, holding up a hand to each. You too, Tiger. Calm down. It all depends on whether having power over life and death follows Stain's tenets or not. Ida grits his teeth. So you're the ones his ideology brought? That's right. He pauses and tilts his head, grinning. Oh yeah, you with the glasses. You were the one who brought about the end of Stain at Hazu City. His grin turns darker as he reaches for something on his back. I apologize for the late introduction. In one swift motion, he whips his arm out, and with it, pulls out an insane amount of swords tied together with a few belts. I'm Spinner, the one who will spin his dreams into a reality. Tiger promptly tells him that he does not care and berates them for hurting Pixie Bob. Meanwhile, Mandalay orders the students, go, everyone. Listen carefully. Do not fight. Ida-kun, you're in charge. Ida straightens up. Understood. He turns. Let's go. Ojiro starts to guide Izuku away with his tail, but the freckled boy can't tear his gaze away from the scene. Midoriya-kun? The villains and the heroes are 2 seconds away from attacking each other, and he knows that once they start, they won't stop until the other side drops. It's already been made personal with Tiger's anger over Pixie Bob's injured face. It's like when you drive by a car crash. It's horrible, and he knows he should look away, should keep moving, but he can't. Except this car crash is only going to get worse. Because Mandalay. He calls out, voice tearing out of his abused throat, I know where he is. She stiffens up. Midoriya-kun. Spinner pauses too, glancing over. His eyes light up when they land on Izuku. Midoriya. He makes to pounce on the boy, but Mandalay intercepts him before he can even get close. She nimbly dodges his cluster of swords and tackles him to the ground, swiping at him with her claws. The other villain lunges forward with her magnetic pole and Tiger blocks her attack with a powerful punch. Go. He barks. A hand grabs Izuku's forearm. Midoriya-kun, come on. Ida orders, dragging him away. Ida-kun, but Izuku digs his heels into the ground. Kota-kun. What? He's in his secret hideout. He's all alone. Izuku whips his head over to Mandalay, who's hastily dodging a series of vicious slashes from Spinner. Please, let me go to him. Don't distract her. Ida wraps an arm around him and very nearly carries him towards the trees. Come on, we need to get out of here. Ojiro puts a hand on his back, pushing him forward as they rush out of the clearing. Aizawa-sensei should be back at the facility, right? Sero asks nervously. Yes, and Vladita is cut off when a strange tickling sensation enters his mind. Ojiro, Sero, and Kota blink at him curiously, but Izuku feels it too. Mandalay's telepathy. Go with him, Ida-kun. Be quick and don't fight anyone, but please, get Kota-kun to safety. Ida and Izuku turn to each other. Izuku can see the turmoil of emotions swirling in his friend's eyes, his sense of duty clashing with his frustration and worry. He clutches the other boy's hand and pours every bit of hope and pleading into his eyes as he gazes up at him. And yeah, maybe that's a little cruel, but he doesn't think twice about doing it because he knows from Uraraka that Ida has a weakness for his Bambi eyes. After a moment, Ida's expression hardens and he orders, "Get on my back." Whoa, what are you guys doing? Sero exclaims. Mandalay's nephew is alone, we're going to go get him, Ida explains as he kneels down, allowing Izuku to climb onto his back. Straightening up, he says, "Go back to the remedial hall. We will be with you shortly." Before any of them can protest, Ida takes off. Startled by the speed, Izuku clings on tight, digging his fingers into his friend's broad shoulders. "Where am I going?" Ida asks. Knowing his weak voice won't be able to be heard over the wind, Izuku puts his mouth close to Ida's ear and rasps, "See that mountain over there? There's a trail that'll lead up to a small cave." The trees whip past them in a blur. In the back of his mind, Izuku is kind of amazed. This is how Ida runs all the time? It's really cool. How does he navigate? He must have amazing reflexes in order to not crash into things all the time. That ridge up there? Ida jerks his head. The middle one. There's a good distance between the training field and Kota's secret hideout. Izuku thinks the boy likes it for the view, but thanks to Ida's quirk, they cover the considerable length of forest within a minute. Izuku peers up at the familiar mountainside as they approach it rapidly. Is someone there? Wait, no, someone is there. His mind barely processes the giant, hulking figure looming over Kota before it's right in front of them. Ida tenses up beneath him, but he doesn't even falter, only pours on speed. Everything becomes kind of a blur for a moment and Izuku has to shut his eyes against the wind stinging them. The next thing he knows, he feels himself being shifted off of Ida's back and the ground is beneath his feet again. Blinking his eyes open, he realizes he's still on the mountain, but a good few meters away from the giant villain. Ida stands defensively in front of him with Kota in his arms, the boy looking just as dumbfounded as Izuku is. "Midoriya-kun," Ida says, not taking his eyes off of the villain as he hands Kota to Izuku, "Take Kota-kun and run." Izuku blinks. Everything's moving so fast he feels like he has whiplash. His mind hasn't even fully processed that there's yet another villain in front of him. Even the villain himself looks surprised at their sudden appearance. Forcing himself out of his shock, Izuku takes a step back. The villain's face splits into a grin. "Eh? What did you call him? Midoriya-kun?" His eyes he only has one, the other is a fake within a gaping wound stemming from a messy gash running along the side of his face lock onto Izuku with a wolfish glint. "This is perfect? You were on the list." Ida tenses up, raising his hackles as he glares at the hulking man. "List? What list?" he demands. "List of kids we're after." The villain blatantly replies, cackling. Izuku's heart skips a beat. Even though he knew that the villains were here for him, actually hearing it confirmed is a whole other thing. A wave of panic threatens to rise within him, a hand on his neck, dragging him into a portal. But wait a minute. His mind backpedals. "Kids. As in plural? In front of him, Ida grits his teeth and shouts, "If you think I'll let you take him, oh, yes, please give me a proper fight." The villain snarls, eyes flashing, "I've been so bored lately, I've loved to crush one of A's precious golden eggs. I'll make sure to torment you thoroughly." He rips off his black cloak in one swift motion and activates his quirk. Raw tendrils of muscle burst out of his skin, overlapping and binding to form thicker muscles. A bolt of fear strikes Izuku. He takes another step back, clutching Kota tightly to his chest. "Ida-kun! Go!" Ida shouts, right as the villain leaps towards him, "Show me your blood." Ida darts forward and Izuku whirls around. He's hardly taken more than a few steps when he's nearly knocked off his feet, the ground vibrating violently beneath him. Kota cries out as he stumbles and he glances over his shoulder to see the villain's fist stuck in the ground where Ida had been standing not a moment ago. The speedster is already on the other side of the man, aiming a powerful kick to the back of his knees as he pulls his fist out of the rubble. Izuku has to turn away or risk tripping on the loose gravel as he skids down the mountainside, but his heart does give a little leap when he hears a grunt from the man behind him. From the way that villain looked, he probably had some sort of muscle enhancement quirk, but Izuku has experienced firsthand today just how fast Ida can be. As much as it pains him to flee and leave his friend alone with the villain, he trusts in his ability to handle himself. Right now, he's more helpful in getting Kota to safety. Now that he has experienced Ida's running speed, however, his own running speed seems painfully slow. He dashes along the slanting trail that leads down to the base of the mountain, struggling not to stumble and break his ankle when the ground shudders like an earthquake beneath him over and over. It's always preceded by the sound of splintering rock and a shriek of rage, the most terrifying and yet reassuring sounds to ever reach Izuku's ears. They let him know that the villain isn't fast enough to catch Ida. Still, he makes sure to keep listening for a pained cry from his friend as he plunges into the thick of the forest. It's hard to see in the pitch-black darkness. One of the reasons why the test of courage was so appealing, but even then they at least had moonlight to go off of. Now, most of the moonlight has been blocked off by the dark clouds from the fire, which he'll need to keep an eye on, although that seems to be on the other side of the forest, but it can spread. Quickly Kota sniffles against his collar. Izuku tightens his arms around him. "Don't worry," he rasps, voice hoarse, "we'll be alright. We're gonna get back to camp." Tears press into his shirt. He'll kill him," he whispers. Izuku spares a quick glance down at him to see his expression utterly horrified, eyes wide and unseeing. He'll. He's the one. He killed Mom and Dad. His voice breaks. Izuku's mind whirls, wondering what he could possibly be talking about. Kota's parents, their killer. Muscular? He asks, unsure, but when Kota nods rapidly, he feels his blood run cold. That's who that villain was. He remembers now, the new story talking about how the water hose duo managed to permanently scar the villain that killed them prior to their demise. Shit, he left Ida with that villain? Izuku yelps when he trips over a root and quickly regains his balance, continuing to run despite the burning in his legs. This is crazy. They were supposed to be safe. The wave of panic threatens to rise again. He shakes his head, struggling to clear it. He likes running, doesn't he? It's been so long since he's been on a long run, and he's on one now, so better use this time for thinking and analysis rather than freaking out, right? Readjusting his grip on Kota, he forces his panic down and focuses on his footsteps flying over the ground. What does he know? The League of Villains is here. They have a Vanguard action squad now apparently, whatever that is. New people, new quirks. Don't know how many are out there. They're after Izuku, but they're also after others. There's a list. Of who? Students? Muscular said kids. Why would they target kids? Do they want to kidnap them? Kill them? Footsteps thunder behind him. He snaps out of his thoughts. The forest vibrates as the sound of crashing trees fills the air. Izuku barely has time to react before he's suddenly scooped up into a pair of arms and tucked against a chest, going faster than he's ever gone before. Ida dashes through the forest swiftly, carrying both him and Kota as the world seems to pass by them in a blur. Izuku makes the mistake of glancing over Ida's shoulder to see Muscular, now nearly twice his original size, charging after them like an enraged bull, knocking down full-grown trees like they're twigs. And the terrifying thing is he's actually keeping up with Ida. This is fun. So much fun. The villain laughs manically. It's like playing cat and mouse. It's been so long since I've had a decent runner. He lunges forward with a swipe and Ida swerves left so hard Izuku gets whiplash. It's a good thing, though, because Muscular's hand slaps down on the ground where Ida was not a millisecond before with a reverberating boom. The villain doesn't even falter, just digs his fingers into the earth and uses it to launch him forward, continuing to chase them relentlessly. What did you say again? That you're gonna save him? That you're a hero? Ida swiftly weaves through the trees like a fish in a stream while Muscular barrels through them like a steamroller, taunting and jeering the entire time. So why are you running? That's a weird way to save someone. Such a funny little hero. Muscular pounces again, narrowly missing them, landing on their right. His impossibly heavy weight smashing into the ground sends shockwaves rippling through the earth, causing Ida to stumble for the barest of seconds. The villain's wide, crazed eyes land on Izuku peeking over Ida's shoulder and he bares his teeth in a grin that nearly splits his face in half. The brief second of falter on both sides passes, Ida regaining his balance and Muscular correcting his course, but to Izuku it feels like a strangely long time. Watching Muscular dare his way through the forest to chase after him reminds Izuku of watching the big T-Rex chasing after the Jeep in Jurassic Park, except a million times more horrifying because this is real life. He's about to tear his gaze away when he spots the villain bring his hand up to his ear and bark, "Yo, Dobby. I'm driving the healer over to your area. Be ready." Izuku's breath hitches. Ida the speedster suddenly falters. "Sensei." The next few seconds happen very quickly. Something flies past Ida, who struggles to slow down from his rapid speed and ducks behind a thick tree, setting down Izuku but not releasing his hold on him as he peeks out from behind the trunk. Stuck between Ida and the tree, Izuku can't see what's going on, but he can hear sounds of fighting, thumps and grunts and snarls. He tightens his grip on Kota and squirms in Ida's grip until he can turn and see what's going on. Aizawa has a much smaller than before Muscular pinned to the ground, quirk erased and bound in his capture weapon. Izuku only has a moment to admire how easy it is for him before he takes note of the situation. "Tell me your purpose, number, and positions," Aizawa demands, holding his wrist behind his back. Muscular struggles against the bindings, spitting and cursing. "I ain't tellin' you shit, hero." Wrong answer. Aizawa proceeds to break his arm. Muscular screams and Izuku feels Kota flinch in his hold. "Your left arms, next," Aizawa says coldly. "Let's do this logically. I don't have all night." "And no you don't." The man snickers. Despite his agony, "You're wasting your time with me, Eraserhead. How long do you think your kids will survive? Think you've trained them well enough? I sure hope so. I hope they can at least put up a good fight. All that one did was run like a little bitch." Aizawa breaks his other arm. This time, Izuku turns Kota's head away and holds him tight against his chest while he quivers. He's reminded of USJ, when Todoroki more or less tortured the villains into giving them information. He gets that it's part of the job, but thankfully, Ida seems to sense his discomfort. He glances down at Kota in his arms, then looks up at Aizawa pinning down the villain. "Say sensei," he calls out uncertainly. Even he seems uncomfortable seeing their teacher's dark side. Obviously, Aizawa can't take his eyes off of Muscular, but he does pause at Ida's voice, so the boy continues, "He's after Midoriya-kun and Bakagu-kun. He told me." Izuku glances at Ida sharply, taken aback. "Kaken? What could the League of Villains possibly want with Kaken?" Aizawa is silent, glaring down at Muscular. Izuku isn't sure what he's looking for in the man's expression, but whatever it is, it's enough to make him pull back and deliver a sharp blow to his head, knocking him unconscious. Aizawa's hair flops around his face. "Are you guys alright?" he asks, straightening up. "What happened?" Now that the immediate danger is gone, Izuku feels like he can finally breathe. He's shaking with fear and exhaustion from running with Koda, but adrenaline keeps him up and standing. He and Ida step through the undergrowth over to Aizawa, both panting from exertion. "Sensei," Ida gasps, "things are terrible. 2 villains attacked Camp 1, took out Pixie Bob, but Mandalay and Tiger I know." Aizawa interrupts. "Mandalay sent out a telepath." "I meant what happened to you?" "Oh, right." Ida shakes his head, as if scolding himself. "Mandalay sent Midoriya-kun and I to retrieve Koda-kun from his secret hideout. He was alone and Midoriya-kun was the only one who knew where it was. This villain was already there when we arrived and he said that there was a list of kids they came here for and that Midoriya-kun and Bakugo-kun were on it." He cuts himself off and glances at Izuku. "Well, he didn't say that Bakugo-kun was on the list, but he asked me where he was, so I'm assuming he's on that list too." Izuku's stomach churns with dread. Aizawa nods, gaze roaming over Ida. "And your injuries?" Izuku blinks and turns to Ida, only now noticing the dark bruises on his shins, the way he's favoring his right leg. "You did it again, didn't you?" Aizawa asks, eyes darkening. "Have you forgotten what happened in Hazu?" Ida glances down at himself before frowning up at Aizawa. "I had to defend myself, sensei." There's a slight edge in his voice. Izuku's about to get a bit defensive too, if Aizawa is implying what he thinks he's implying. But instead, all Aizawa says is, "I know. So you're going to take these two, you're going to go back to camp, and you're going to tell Mandalay that the students of Class 1A and B have my permission to engage in combat." Izuku's eyes widen. Aizawa clenches his jaw in resignation. "Now go. Vlad King should be in the remedial hall. You'll be safest there." Ida nods, and then Izuku is once again being scooped up with Koda in his arms. They leave Aizawa with the unconscious villain and make their way through the forest at a speedy, but less desperate pace. Ida slows down to make sure they don't accidentally run into any villains by surprise, but they soon come across a familiar path and follow it back to the main clearing. When they reach it, Mandalay and Tiger are still fighting Spinner and the large woman. Not only are the villains holding their own against the heroes, but Mandalay looks like she's beginning to struggle against Spinner. No doubt she's at a disadvantage in a drawn-out fight with her emitter-type quirk. Izuku briefly wonders where Ragdoll is before recalling her position at the checkpoint. She's probably helping out students in the forest. Ida skids to a halt behind the tree line. "Ida-kun," Izuku croaks, wiggling out of Ida's grasp, "help Mandalay. She needs to deliver Aizawa-sensei's message." "What? I can't leave you alone." Ida protests, shaking his head. "The villains are targeting you. If we shout to her, not only will it distract her, but it will bring the villains' attention to me too." Izuku argues, "She needs help, and you're the only one who can get close enough to her." He pushes himself out of his friend's arms and drops to his feet. Ida looks torn, glancing between him and the battle raging on in the field. "What about you?" "I'll bring Koda-kun to the remedial hall," Izuku says, readjusting his grip on the boy. "Don't worry, I'll give the clearing a wide berth. Meet me there, okay?" Ida's jaw clenches. For a long moment, he's silent, but with a harsh huff, he finally caves. Putting a large hand on Izuku's shoulder, he lowers his head to look in his eyes and says firmly, "If you come across a villain, you run, understand? I don't care what Aizawa-sensei said, okay?" Izuku's lip twitches despite himself and he nods. They part ways and Izuku takes off sprinting again with Koda clinging to his neck. He runs through the forest, diverging from the path to steer clear of the battle-filled clearing. The stench of smoke is still in the air and it's only getting stronger, but he isn't quite sure which way to turn in order to avoid the fire. He's also making sure to keep an eye out for whoever this Dabi person he heard Muscular mention, though. If supposedly they were being driven towards his area, even if the chase was interrupted shortly after, then he might be nearby. Everyone in Class A and Class B. In the name of the Pro Hero Eraserhead, you are granted permission to engage in combat. I repeat. Everyone in Class A and Class B. You are granted permission to engage in combat. Izuku feels slightly better knowing that his classmates are allowed to defend themselves now. He knows they're strong, they handled themselves well during USJ even though they barely had any training. But something about this situation seems a lot more serious than USJ. The villains at USJ were small-timers, a mere ragtag team of crooks. These villains are a lot more lethal. His mind tingles again. We have discovered two of the villains' targets. Bakugo-kun and Midoriya-kun. Try to avoid combat and acting independently. Understand? Too late for that. Hopefully Mandalay won't get mad at Ida for letting Izuku run off by himself. Well, Izuku isn't technically alone, he's with Kota, who he has to protect. As for Kaken, he should be with Todoroki, right? They should be able to keep each other safe. If Izuku hasn't heard his best friend's explosions by now, then that probably means they haven't come across any villains. Although, they would have to worry about the forest catching on fire or, well, more fire, but even Todoroki's eyes can be seen from a distance if he makes it big enough. Distracted, Izuku trips over a stone and nearly falls on top of Kota, catching himself at the last second. Muttering an apology under his breath, he ignores the burning in his legs and keeps running through the undergrowth. He had to step off the path in order to give the clearing a wide berth, but now that he thinks about it, that might not have been a great plan. It's dark, the air is steadily getting thicker with black smoke, and he only has a vague idea where the remedial hall is from here. He gives himself a quick shake to clear his thoughts. He can worry about Todoroki and Kaken later once Kota is safe. They'll be fine. They have to be fine. He needs to focus on himself right now. Someone steps out from behind a tree. Izuku skids to a halt. They spot each other at the same time. The man is tall, dark-haired, covered in purple scars that are seemingly stapled to his skin, and Izuku does not recognize him. He freezes. The villain takes one look at him before his face peels into a grin. Izuku's blood runs cold. There you are, Midoriya Izuku. They found him. There's a villain right here, right in front of him, only a few feet away, and he's frozen in fear. There's no heroes around to save him. Panic rises within him, threatening to overwhelm him, drown him, and for a moment all he can think is, this is it. He's going to kidnap me. He's going to take me to Shigaraki, to All for One. I'm never going to see my friends or my mother or All Might ever again. The villain takes a step towards him. Izuku drops Kota. Run, he croaks, not taking his eyes off the man. Get out of here. Kota trembles at his feet. What? I can't let go. Izuku kicks him away, not hard enough to hurt but hard enough to get him moving. Kota startles, only hesitating for a brief moment before turning and disappearing into the bushes. The villain, thankfully, doesn't go after him. Smart kid, he drawls, taking another step towards Izuku. Fear jolts through Izuku, and he stumbles backwards. The man pauses, head tilting slightly as he smirks, eyeing him up and down in a way that makes his skin prickle. You've been quite slippery, you know? Why don't you make this easier on yourself and come quietly? Izuku gulps, but something about his suggestion and his taunting voice seems strangely familiar. His mind flashes back to his training with Shinsu this morning, that unconcerned look that pissed him off so much. This guy looks just like that, with his lazy smirk and hooded eyes. He's hardly threatened by Izuku at all. Indignation sparks in his chest, slicing through the numb fear like a knife. Come quietly, huh? In response, he curls his trembling fingers and raises his fists, shifting into a fighting stance. The villain's smirk widens. Suit, yourself. He spreads his arms to the sides and activates his quirk, letting plumes of blue flames erupt from his hands. They flicker off his skin, tendrils flying to the nearby trees and shrubbery. Wood crackles and pops under the intense heat, and Izuku tenses up, watching the flames crawl down to the bushes. With the undergrowth in this particular area being so thick, he has no doubt that it will take just a few minutes before this part of the forest is engulfed in flames. He needs to get out of here. So, the villain says, arching a slim brow, how about now? He takes another step forward and Izuku takes another step back, glancing around at the approaching flames uncertainly. What can he do here? What can he do here? This guy has a fire quirk, which means he's a long-distance fighter, which means Izuku would be at a disadvantage in a fight against him. He'd be burned to a crisp before he could even get in close enough to land a hit. So what should he do? Run? It would be good to lead him further away from Kota, but the villains are after him, not Kota, so running might do more harm than good, especially if it leads him farther away from the heroes. Plus this villain would probably burn down the whole forest, chasing him as if to prove his point. Said villain throws a ball of fire at his feet, causing Izuku to yelp and scramble away. The man laughs. "Oh, come on, kid, don't make me grab you," he says, grinning as he raises a hand flickering with blue flames. "I'd feel bad if I hurt a healer." Izuku flinches back, then pauses. "Wait a minute. I'll leave him alone." The flames suddenly go out. The villain blinks. Slowly, he turns to look at his hand, which is now soaking wet. Then, he glances over his shoulder. Kota stands behind him with his hands thrown out, wide-eyed and scared stiff, but glaring at the villain with more hatred than he's ever glared at the heroes with. And Izuku is ashamed. His heart clenches with fear, with guilt for causing such pain and terror for his friends and heroes, for making them fight and bleed for his sake. For making a 5-year-old boy tremble before a villain to protect him. Shame bubbles in his chest, but underneath it, something burns, scalding hot and absolutely furious. He launches himself at the distracted villain, delivering a roundhouse kick to the back of his turned head. Kota yelps and scrambles out of the way as the man collapses, where he was standing a moment before. "Kota, run!" Izuku shouts. His voice sounds like he's gargling broken glass at this point, but he barely notices the pain thanks to the adrenaline coursing through his body. "Get back to the camp." But what about you?" Kota cries, rushing over to clutch at his leg. "They're after you. My quirk, I can get you through the fire." Izuku shakes his head and grabs Kota to look at him seriously. "Kota-kun, please, I need you to run. They're after me. You've seen me training, remember? You know I can handle myself, but I can't protect the both of us. Go back to the remedial center and find Vlad King. Send him after me, okay? Can you do that for me?" Kota nods tearfully as the villain stirs behind him. Izuku tenses up. "Go." He pushes the boy into an unburned section of the undergrowth. Kota quickly disappears and Izuku turns his attention back to the scarred man as he slowly picks himself off the ground, rubbing the back of his head. "Damn." He chuckles, turning to grin at Izuku, "Not bad for a healer." Izuku falls back into his fighting stance, eyeing him warily. "They don't make him easy to catch at up." "You don't say," the villain drawls, taking his hand off his head as he stalks towards him. Shigaraki-kun still won't shut up about what happened at the mall. He throws a ball of fire at the bushes on Izuku's left side. Izuku flinches away. "I guess I can see now why you piss him off so much now. There's a lot of foliage on the ground that catches fire easily too." Izuku staggers backwards to avoid the flames that crawl towards him. The villain continues advancing on him, sending a stream of flames to an untouched tree on his right, setting it ablaze and causing him to stumble away. The thing is, though, he avoids him. "Come on, kid, don't make me grab you. I'd feel bad if I hurt a healer." Izuku's mind works rapidly as he dodges another attack. Maybe he wasn't just teasing? Maybe he can't hurt him? Maybe he's not allowed to hurt him? If you want me to heal your sensei, then there's something about my quirk you should know. It doesn't work if I'm injured. If All for One is after him, then these villains need to somehow kidnap him without injuring him. Right? But he hastily dodges a blazing fireball thrown over his shoulder, ducking behind a boulder. Hiding? A little cowardly, don't you think? Comes the villain's languid voice. Geez, you're starting to make me feel like the bad guy here. Izuku gasps for breath, struggling to think. Okay, that was close. Maybe he was wrong? But Muscular got pretty close to him too. Muscular. Yo, Dabi. I'm driving the healer over to your area. Be ready. Hey. Izuku squeaks from behind the boulder, are you Dabi? Who wants to know? Okay, so if this is Dabi, then why doesn't he just grab him? Why bother with the flames? All he's doing is risking Izuku's injury and potentially ruining the chances of All for One getting healed. He'd have a much better chance of kidnapping Izuku without injuring him if he subdued him without using his quirk. Oh, what Izuku wouldn't give to have Shinsu's quirk right now. He could just brainwash this guy into giving him all the answers. A jet of blue flames suddenly burst on all sides of the boulder, startling Izuku. He flinches, curling into a ball to avoid the flames licking at him with their searing heat. There's no time to ponder about the mindset of villains. He needs to get back to the heroes. Izuku pushes himself off the ground and flees. Dabi takes off after him. Now that he's fairly certain the villain won't hurt him, Izuku isn't as concerned about turning his back on him as he is about finding a way out of the forest before it burns down. Dabi catches on quickly and sends a stream of flames ahead of him, setting the brushwood in front of him ablaze. Izuku has to skid to a halt and change directions or risk stumbling into a fiery death. Sweat drips down the back of his neck as he runs, frantically trying to think of which is the way back to camp. He veers left, but that gets thrown up in flames too. Dabi's footsteps pound relentlessly behind him. As Izuku runs through the forest, he slowly starts to realize that he can hear sounds of fighting, screams and shouts from other students, but he can't tell where they're coming from. Blood roars in his ears and his legs shake with exhaustion, but he can't stop running. Dabi is deadly fast and he keeps cutting off every path back to camp, forcing him deeper and deeper into the forest. Another turn leads to another unburned path getting set ablaze within seconds, and Izuku feels fear swelling in his chest as he quickly swerves away. The undergrowth whips his calves as he runs, Dabi chasing him for what feels like ages. He soon starts coughing, the black smoke from Dabi's fires filling the air, getting thicker as the fires grow. His head is starting to spin from the lack of clean oxygen as he forces himself to run on wobbly legs, entering a clearing of scraggly-looking trees that are already on fire. The bright flickering light of the flames makes his eyes hurt as he glances around, desperately searching for an unburned area he can run through. Spotting one, he dashes over to it, only for it to be engulfed in flames a moment later. He doesn't need to glance over his shoulder to know that Dabi is still following him. Panic rises in his throat, but he swallows it down. There's another unburned area. He sees it. It's kind of close to Dabi. He probably won't make it in time before the villain burns it too. But Izuku skids to a halt in front of the unburned path. Everything around him is engulfed in flames. The path remains unburned. He pauses for a long moment, then slowly looks back at Dabi. The villain stands, poised, a few feet away, watching him with cold, calculating eyes. A hunter's eyes. And Izuku understands. Dabi is not the one meant to capture him. No, he's the pursuer. Izuku is the prey and Dabi is the wolf that's meant to separate him from his friends and herd him to where his packmates lie in the shadows waiting to pounce. Izuku steps away from the path. Dabi's lip curls. Clever little thing, aren't you? He drawls, Shigaraki-kun said you might figure it out. Izuku's eyes land on his ear and his stomach turns to ice. There's an earpiece. Just like Muscular. He was probably communicating with them the whole time. God, Izuku's an idiot for running. He takes a step towards Dabi. You can't hurt me, he rasps, you need my quirk to work. Dabi sighs through his nose, as if he's disappointed. So it's gonna be like that, huh? Izuku stares at him blankly. Yeah, we need your quirk to work. So how about we just wait here patiently for my friends to arrive? Okay? Fear spikes through Izuku. It's no use. He stammers, I've been sparring for the past 2 days. I'm covered in bruises, it won't even work. That's not actually a lie. There's a reason his quirk hasn't been activating on contact when his friends have been touching him. Dabi's eyes narrow. You look fine. Nice try. Izuku isn't sure why he said that, there's definitely some visible bruises on him. He glances down at himself, at his bare arms and legs. No bruises. His eyes widen. What? No way. He's been sparring and, honestly, kind of getting his ass kicked for the past 2 days. How does he not have bruises? His quirk didn't activate when Nita carried him even though he was injured. Maybe it's just the weird lighting or the heat. The hot springs. The long soaks he's been taking every day after sparring, the one he just did before dinner. Heat boosts circulation and increases blood flow, which would reduce inflammation and pain. Which helps in the case of the students not waking up incredibly sore every morning, but for Izuku right now, the damage is still there, he reassures himself. He doesn't heal broken capillaries. His quirk didn't activate with Ida. But still, his stomach churns with anxiety. There's a traitorous voice in his head that's whispering, but what if? Apostrophe. There's a villain right in front of him. More are on their way right now. He could be taken to All for One, could be forced to heal him, and then. He can't even bring himself to imagine that future. He won't allow himself to imagine that future. So, he bares his teeth and raises his hand to his mouth. Dabi's eyes widen. A second later, he's right in front of him, grabbing his wrists in both hands and yanking them away from his face. Oh, you're a little shit, aren't you? Izuku headbutts him in the nose and hears it crunch. The moment Dabi lets go of his wrist, Izuku strikes him in the solar plexus. Hard. Yup, he's a little shit alright. As the villain goes down with a wheeze, Izuku grabs him by the wrist, spins him around, and pins him chest down onto the ground. He finishes with a quick kick to the back of the head which he hopes will actually keep him knocked out this time. Instead, something weird happens. Dabi melts. Izuku startles, suddenly finding himself standing in a puddle of mush instead of on top of a scarred villain. What the fuck? Wasn't his quirk fire? Does he have multiple? Is he some sort of Namu? Well, whatever he is, he seems to be gone now. His fire, however, isn't. Izuku coughs, head spinning from lack of clean air. He stumbles away from the puddle of Dabi, trying to find a way out of the flames. He obviously can't go the way Dabi wanted him to go, but the villain blocked all his other paths. He didn't, however, bother to burn the way he came from. Izuku runs along there for a while, eyes streaming from the smoke as he hastily dodges blue flames. He hastily fumbles for his phone to call someone, but it must have fallen out of his pocket at some point when Muscular or Dabi was chasing him. So he just curses to himself and keeps running. He listens for the sounds of footsteps behind him, keeps his senses on alert for any signs of being pursued, but he doesn't find any. The forest is strangely silent around him, quiet except for the crackling of the Dabi's flames. He isn't quite sure where he's going, if he's nearing the camp or just going deeper into the woods. Inhaling so much smoke has left him rather disoriented, but gradually, the air around him starts to clear up. Some of the smaller shrubs and grasses have been burnt black already, leaving no kindling for the flames to burn and therefore, no more fire. An escape path. His coughs and hacks echo loudly in the forest around him. Izuku winces, both at the pain in his throat and at the volume. He's long since stopped running, even though he knows he should be doing everything he can to get back to the heroes as quickly as possible. But he's lost. He's confused, he doesn't even know where he's going. And he's too exhausted to run anymore. His legs quiver with every step. Suddenly, the tree branches rustle. Izuku freezes, adrenaline shooting through him once more. Somehow, his body still has some to spare. For a few tense moments, he stares up at the trees, eyes wide, pupils dilated, muscles tense, waiting for whatever else this hell of a night has to throw at him. Then, Izuku. Kaken's voice calls from the bushes. The bushes. Izuku stares at his friends Kaken, Todoroki, Uraraka, Tsu, Shoji, Tokoyami for a brief moment as they burst through the undergrowth and rush over to him before he whips his head back towards the trees. In the second that he looked away, a man has come to stand on one of the branches. Well, the masked villain croons. It's my lucky day. Both my targets have come to me at the same time. As soon as Kaken hears his voice, he skids to a halt and whirls around, glaring daggers. Die! He screeches, launching himself at the villain with an explosion. He aims another one at his face, but the man nimbly jumps over him and taps him on the back. Izuku watches in horror as his childhood friend vanishes into a small, blue marble. Bakugo-kun! Uraraka cries out in horror, "What have you done with him?" "Nothing bad," the villain replies casually, flipping the marble in his fingers, "I merely took him with my magic." The mask turns towards Izuku and he gets the distinct feeling of eyes landing on him. He tenses up, but before he can do anything, there's a wall of ice in front of him. His friends are still some distance away, but Todoroki's ice reaches him in seconds, providing a barrier between him and the masked villain. Izuku stumbles backwards, hearing the familiar creaks and groans that let him know that Todoroki is sending out even more ice attacks. Meanwhile, Uraraka rushes to his side and clutches him tightly, keeping her eyes on the fight, which he can't see very well thanks to the wall of ice. There's the sound of rustling branches, and then silence. He's gone. Shoji hisses. Damn it. Todoroki curses, he's fast. He was able to dodge my ice. Bakugo-kun? Did he? Uraraka asks. He took him, Shoji says. Izuku's stomach plummets as ice-cold fear washes over him. No. Not Kaken, not Kaken, they're after him. Why did they have to take Kaken? Leave him alone. We have to get him back. He croaks. Todoroki's eyes widen, as if he just realized that he's actually here. Midoriya! He exclaims, rushing over to his side. Are you alright? What happened? I'm fine. Izuku interrupts, pushing him away when he looks like he's about to start fussing. We need to save Kaken. You need to get somewhere safe, Midoriya-kun, Uraraka says, grabbing his shoulder. The villains are after you too. We can't lead you straight to them. But Kaken! Izuku cries. I'll go after the villain, Todoroki says immediately. Tsu, come with me please. You too, Tokoyami, if you feel you have enough control over Dark Shadow now. Izuku glances sharply at Tokoyami, who he now notices isn't looking so good. Despite his panic, worry tugs at his healer heart. Are you alright? He also realizes that Shoji is carrying someone unconscious on his back. Who is that? A Class B student, Shoji replies, got knocked out by the gas. I lost control over Dark Shadow briefly, but I am willing to fight again tonight. Tokoyami turns to Todoroki. Let's go. There's no time to lose. Todoroki nods and looks at Izuku seriously. We'll save him. You get back to camp. Wait, is splitting up a great idea? Uraraka asks nervously. We don't know how many villains are out there. You don't even have a plan. Like Tokoyami-chan said, Okako-chan, Asui ribbits, there's no time to lose. We can't afford to hesitate. The villain is getting farther and farther away as we speak. Todoroki-chan, Tokoyami-chan, and I have the best chance to retrieve Bakugo-chan from him since we are long-distance fighters. Shoji-chan can hear any other villains that may approach you and Midoriya-chan while you get to safety. It makes sense. Todoroki is starting to look impatient. Yes, it's a good plan. Can we get going now? Izuku reluctantly nods because what else can he do ? And they part ways. The Bikugo rescue team takes off running, but before the Midoriya escort squad gets moving, Uraraka offers to take the unconscious student off Shoji's back so that he can use his limbs more easily. Don't worry, I can lighten him up with my quirk, Uraraka says, already sliding the boy off his back. Even though there's no visible wounds on the student, the sight of someone unconscious sends a flutter of unease through Izuku. Actually, can I look over him real quick? He asks, just set him down for a moment. I won't take long, of course, it's just hell knows what was in that villain's gas. Of course, Shoji says, head swiveling around. Izuku eyes his bleeding arm and makes a mental note to check that out later too. He's just dropped to his knees beside the unconscious student when suddenly there's the sound of rustling leaves a few meters away. On either side of him, Shoji and Uraraka startle. Bikugo-kun? They both dash over to the source of the sound behind him. Stunned, it takes a second for his mind to catch up, but when he does, he whips his head around to look over his shoulder, still kneeling on the ground. Sure enough, Kaken is standing in a cluster of bushes, looking just as confused as Izuku as Shoji and Uraraka run over to him. When he and Kaken make eye contact, however, his friend's gaze slides over his head and locks onto something behind him before his eyes widen in horror. In the next second, the blonde lunges forward, exploding out of the bushes in a fit of rage, but it's too late. Something lightly taps Izuku on the back and his entire existence shrinks into a small blue world. Izuku! Bikugo snarls, flying past a confused Shoji and Uraraka as he aims an explosion at the masked villain. The man dodges, jumping up onto a low-hanging branch of a nearby tree, hastily dodging again when the enraged boy follows. Bikugo chases him all the way up into the thicker branches of the trees, ignoring the cries of his classmates stuck on the ground, and lets out a series of explosions that nearly incinerates all the leaves on the branches. For a few long moments afterwards, silence fills the air, as well as smoke from the burned wood and leaves. Bikugo stands with his back against the trunk, teeth bared and hands crackling with small explosions, but he can hardly see through the smoke screen he's created. A hand touches his head and his world turns small. From the ground, Shoji and Uraraka watch in dismay as the masked villain jumps out of the smoke-filled tree, two gleaming marbles in hand. Footsteps pound behind them, and Todoroki, Tokoyami, and Asui reappear. We heard Bikugo's explosions. What? Todoroki skids to a halt, glaring up at the villain. Shit. My, what language, he says chidingly, don't be so crude, we won't treat your friends badly. After all, they have so much talent. We're merely just taking them to a stage, where they can shine more. Give him back. Todoroki snaps. Him? Oh, you have a preference, do you? The mask croons, it's not nice to play favorites, you know. Todoroki grits his teeth as he laughs. But if I had to guess which one of these lovely boys would be your favorite, it would be. He raises the marbles closer to his face. Eeny, meeny, miny. Todoroki interrupts him by sending a massive wave of ice at him. The villain hurriedly dodges, slips the marbles in his pocket, before pressing his finger to his earpiece. Vanguard Action Squad. Target successfully collected. It was just a short while. But with this, our show has come to a close. As arranged, head to the retrieval point in the next 5 minutes. He turns and begins racing across the forest, bouncing from treetop to treetop. Todoroki, Tokoyami, Shoji, Asui, and Uraraka chase after him desperately, but it quickly becomes clear that they have no hope of keeping up with him. So they come up with a plan. Uraraka makes them float, and Asui uses her tongue to launch Shoji, Todoroki, and Tokoyami into the air, the former clinging to the two latter. They crash into the masked villain and pin him to the ground in the middle of a clearing. Compress. Todoroki glances up to see Dabi preparing to roast them alive. Get out of the way. Roger. Compress grunts before turning himself into a marble. Dabi immediately sends a wave of blue flames at the three students. Todoroki and Tokoyami manage to dodge to the sides, but Shoji, who was in the middle, gets partially burned. Shoji! Todoroki exclaims, when his classmate screams in pain. He moves to rush to his aid, but a villain dressed in black and gray intercepts him, dodging his ice and slicing through it with his measuring tape. Meanwhile, a teenage girl not much older than them goes after Shoji, wildly swinging with her knife and giggling the whole time. Compress reforms with a wince, rubbing his shoulder. Ow! I can't believe you flew so far to chase after me. Your ideas are far out, he grumbles to himself. Oi, mister, Dabi calls out, idly holding off a screeching dark shadow with one hand gushing flames. Where are you hiding the brats? I thought you said you had them? Of course. He reaches into his pocket, only for it to be empty. Shoji yells at Todoroki and Tokoyami to retreat, showing the marbles in his grasp. The students proceed to flee, but Kurogiri arrives, blocking their path. It has been 5 minutes since the signal. Let's go. Dabi is reluctant, but Compress reassures him. They seemed so happy that they rushed out here, so I thought I'd give them a present. It's a habit, one of the basics of magic. He turns to face the students and takes off his mask, revealing the marbles on his tongue. When I flaunt something, it's because there's something I don't want you to see. With a snap of his fingers, he releases the ice in Shoji's hand. Todoroki, Tokoyami, and Shoji stare at him in dismay only for a brief moment before charging, but the villain is already stepping back into the portal. And now, that's all from Aoyama's laser suddenly blasts out of nowhere, shattering Compress's mask and knocking the marbles out of his mouth. Shoji and Todoroki both lunge at the same time, the former's fist closing around one marble, the latter reaching for the other, only to have it stolen at the last second by Dabi. Tokoyami and Dark Shadow attempt to take it from him, but a wave of flames forces them back. Confirm it now, Dabi orders Compress, release this. Gritting his teeth, Compress backs into the portal and snaps his fingers, releasing the marbles. Bukigyu appears in Shoji's grip. He comes out swinging this time, nearly punching his classmate while Midoriya appears in Dabi's. The villain grins and wraps his hand around the back of Midoriya's neck. The boy stiffens. Too bad we couldn't get both, Dabi says, but at least this one's more useful. He begins dragging Midoriya through the portal. Midoriya-kun. Izuku. Todoroki and Bukigyu both lunge for Midoriya, the latter propelling himself forward with explosions. Even as he rapidly closes in on the other, he knows he won't make it in time. He locks eyes with his friend, his best friend, the one he's been protecting since childhood, and what he sees makes his heart stop. It isn't fear that he's about to get kidnapped or anguish that he might never live to see another day. It's relief. There's relief in Midoriya's eyes, relief that he's the one being taken and not Bukigyu. It makes him want to throw up. The portal closes. Chapter 31. Warping is a strange experience, but Izuku is too busy panicking to dwell on it for very long. Kaken's desperate crimson eyes are the last thing he sees before everything goes dark for a couple of seconds and he feels himself being dragged backwards. Things light up again briefly, long enough for his brain to process the fact that he's been transported to a new location, and then the hand on the back of his neck is pushing him down. More hands grab him, shoving him to his knees, then further down. He grunts when his chest hits the ground, squirming under Dabi's weight above him. As this happens, he hears someone say, "Hey, hey, hey, I thought we were supposed to be gentle with this one?" His voice sounds familiar, right, Spinner? From the clearing. He managed to escape Tiger and Mandalay, then? Izuku's hands are yanked behind him and tied at the wrist, the same done to his ankles not soon after. There are a lot of feet shuffling around him, so it's hard to see who's who. but a pair of red shoes comes to stop in front of him. Yeah, but considering what happened last time, there's a good chance he'll try and hurt himself. Izuku freezes. This voice he recognizes right away. This voice has been terrorizing him every night for the past 2 weeks. This voice belongs to Shigaraki Tamura. Izuku can't help it, he begins to tremble. Something is abruptly shoved into his mouth, some rough piece of fabric that startles him momentarily. As Dabi starts tying it behind his head, Shigaraki adds, "Sorry about the gag. Can't have you biting your tongue now, can we?" Once the gag is tied, Dabi finally gets off, leaving Izuku lying bound on the floor in front of Shigaraki. The familiar wave of panic from before threatens to rise within him, one that he does a much less better job at suppressing than usual as Shigaraki squats down next to him. His face is covered with a severed hand, but Izuku gets the feeling that he's grinning like a madman. Well, Midoriya Izuku, long time no see. Sorry about the kidnapping, although I'm sure you understand why it was necessary, he drawls condescendingly, tone then taking a bit of a sharper edge, but let's not pull a stunt like last time, alright? Heart beating so hard it feels like it's going to pound right out of his chest, all Izuku can do is stare. Shigaraki looms over him, covered in severed hands, looking as ragged and terrifying as he did in his nightmares. He forces himself to tear his gaze away from the man, taking in as much information about his new environment as possible. It looks like he's in some sort of bar setting, plain, blank walls, wood floor, but what's most noticeable is that he's surrounded by villains. There's Shigaraki, Kurogiri, Dabi, Spinner, the magnetic woman from earlier, the masked man, and 2 other people he doesn't recognize. Izuku swallows. All thoughts of possibly fighting his way out of this go out of his head. Good to see that your little bad decision healed nicely, though, Shigaraki says, hand reaching out to brush his knuckles gently against Izuku's scarred throat. Izuku has never flinched away from something so hard before in his life. Shigaraki lets out a burst of high-pitched laughter, as if that's the funniest thing he's ever witnessed. The skin on his throat itches where Shigaraki touched him and disgust bubbles in Izuku's stomach. He cranes away from him, but the villain snatches his jaw in a 4-fingered grip, dragging the boy's face close to his own. That should have killed you, you know? He hisses, guttural and low, my quirk always kills people, but you. It's like you're a fucking cheat code for yourself too. His grip loosens slightly, just slightly, and his thumb rubs over Izuku's jaw almost thoughtfully. The edge of his lip curls underneath his mask. You shouldn't look so surprised about this. Remember what I said back then? My sensei always gets what he wants. Leaning closer, he lowers his voice to whisper with glee, and once you've ceased being useful, I am going to kill you as slowly as I please, you infuriating little brat. Izuku swallows. The blatant delight in his voice is a surefire promise of a painful death. Shigaraki stands, dragging him up with him. Kurogiri, he barks, take us to sensei. Panic surges through him. Eyes widening, he immediately forgoes all logic and starts struggling, ignoring the fact that he's tied up and surrounded by villains, but Shigaraki keeps a tight hold on him. Fresh terror swells within him like a wave and he doesn't even bother trying to subdue it this time. All of the sudden, at Shigaraki's word, this becomes real. The villains won. They got what they wanted. All of the hero's efforts to protect Izuku were in vain. He's going to be taken to all for one, a villain that has ruled the underworld for centuries, and there's nothing he can do about it. He's not ready for this, he can't do this, he can't. He's just a 15-year-old boy, he was just supposed to spend the summer with his friends, he can't do this dash. But the villains certainly don't care, and the next thing Izuku knows he's being warped again, and his vision is going dark once more, and when he blinks, he almost doesn't realize he's in another room at first. It's dark in here. He first notices the bright light coming from a TV. It's harsh and glowing, but it seems to be the only source of light in the darkness. bathing everything in the room in a pale white gleam. Everything else is shrouded in shadow, but he can hear the gentle whir of unseen machinery scattered throughout the room. The floor is carpeted, and there's a single, large chair in the middle of the room, occupied by a single, large man. Izuku can't breathe. He isn't sure how he would have imagined what All for One would look like. A dark, shadowy figure always came to mind whenever All Might would tell him about his injury. He supposes he always assumed that whoever gave the number one hero such a gruesome wound must have been a powerful being of immeasurable proportions. Even after All Might told him the truth, whenever they would talk about All for One, it would always be with a certain disconnect, almost like he was something of a fantasy. Like he was such a horrible monster that it's hard to believe that he's even real. Like something you see on the news that you think is horrible, but you don't realize how horrible until it happens to you. Reality has never been more terrifying. All for One is not a dark, shadowy figure, but a living, breathing man. Bathed in the pale light of the TV, he sits in the chair as if it were a throne, posture relaxed and legs slightly spread. He seems entirely unbothered by the multitude of tubes and wires sticking out of his throat and face. His breath rattles in a strangely distorted way with every inhale and exhale, echoing throughout the room. His face is a mess of scars, and he has no eyes. Izuku tries to swallow, but his throat has gone dry. This isn't what he imagined. This is a living nightmare, right in front of him. Shigaraki's tight grip on his arm shifts. A hand clamps down on the back of his neck and four clammy fingers wrap around his throat, sliding into the same position they were in on the day of the mall, pressing into his scars. He's forced down onto his knees, and Shigaraki kneels beside him. "Sensei." He sounds excited, like he's a kid coming home to show a dazzling report card to their parent. The mission was a success. For the most part. The Vanguard Action Squad failed to retrieve the Bikugu, but look, I brought you Midoriya Izuku, just like you asked. The web of scars covers the top half of All for One's face, leaving only the bottom half responsible for emoting. Izuku learns that seeing someone smile without eyes is sickening. "Wonderful job, Tamura-kun," he says, voice deep and somewhat mechanically warped from the tubes in his throat. His head turns ever so slightly, and even though he has no eyes, Izuku suddenly feels as if he's being pinned by an intense gaze. His hands grow cold. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Midoriya-kun," the voice rumbles. "Pardon me if I'm being presumptuous, but I'm assuming you know why I brought you here?" Izuku trembles under the villain's sightless gaze. Of course he does. It's all his panicked mind can think about. All for One brought him here because he needs Izuku to heal him, to fix the damage that All Might caused, so that he can rise up again and resume his reign of terror. The young healer can barely look at the man's disfigured face without feeling bile burn at the back of his throat. All for One doesn't wait for an answer. "I've been so curious about you ever since Tamura-kun told me what happened at USJ. I expressed an interest in meeting you, but he took it upon himself to attempt to kidnap you in a hasty manner that resulted in your injury. I apologize for that." The fingers on Izuku's neck tighten, slightly. "I don't," Shigaraki says rather childishly, "it was his fault. Forgive my student," All for One tells him, sounding almost exasperated. He is still learning the value of patience. To Shigaraki, he says chastisingly, "Tamura-kun, Midoriya-kun is our welcomed guest. Please, be polite." Surprisingly, Shigaraki obeys, or at least quiets down, and the grip on Izuku's neck loosens. Izuku remains on guard, eyes flickering between the two warily. Unfazed by the interruption, All for One continues, "At first, I'll admit, I did not know what to think. I knew my old nemesis should have been weakened by our battle, and I was certain he would perish at the hands of my Namu. I was astonished when Tamura-kun told me that my Namu was unable to kill All Might during USJ, how he didn't appear weak at all, how you ran in and healed his wounds within seconds. But then during the sports festival, It was announced that I had taken in a bright young healer, and it all made sense. How All Might regained his strength, why he suddenly decided to work at It's all because of you, my boy. How curious. His tone is pleasant and welcoming, tickling Izuku's brain in a strangely warm way. But it's so fake, practically dripping with sweet venom. Izuku sees through it right away and focuses on his words, realizing something important. All for One doesn't know that All Might isn't completely healed. I'm afraid I never placed enough value in healers in my youth, All for One admits, and I pay the price for that now. He raises his arms slightly and gestures to himself. After a pause, he says, even so, if I understand correctly, your quirk is a rarity among rarities. It must be, if you were able to bring back All Might from the brink of death. Izuku swallows. Here it comes. Broaching the topic of his quirk. Honestly, considering the terrible shape that All Might was in after that fight of which he was the winner, All for One doesn't look as bad as Izuku would have thought. He's not nearly as frail or emaciated as All Might used to be. Which terrifies Izuku to think of what he would look like if he were completely healed. Izuku can't let that happen. There are a million reasons why, but the most important being he hasn't fully healed All Might yet. If he just barely won against All for One in his prime, he won't stand a chance against him now. Just the thought has Izuku's breathing accelerating. Thanks to the gag, his harsh inhales and exhales are quite loud through his nose, audible in the quiet room. All for One pauses. Then, he sighs, a long-suffering sigh of patience that makes Izuku flinch. Now, I'm sure you've been told many things about me. And I'm sure All Might himself has told you these things. So, I have no doubt that you see me as an enemy. You would be a fool not to. I know my old nemesis, and I know that he has probably painted me out to be some horrendous monster in your eyes. But despite what you may believe, I do have standards. I do not approve of the murder of children. And I will not harm you. Izuku blinks. All for One doesn't approve of the murder of children? He thinks about Muscular tearing through the forest, like a juggernaut to chase after him, Kota, and Ida. Yeah, he has a hard time believing that. All for One has gone quiet now, obviously waiting for an answer. Shigaraki catches on. He's gagged, sensei. All for One is blind. It should be obvious, considering the lack of eyes, but the guy has the ability to take quirks, so anything goes. Izuku files the information away for later. And why is that? All for One asks. I didn't want him to bite his tongue, Shigaraki replies. Remember, he told me his quirk doesn't work if he's injured. That's why I failed to catch him the first time. He grumbles the last part, fingers clenching a bit tighter around Izuku's neck. All for One hums, then gestures with his hand. Bring him closer, please, Tamura-kun. Shigaraki straightens and pulls Izuku up with him. Since his legs are tied together, he has to practically drag the boy across the room towards All for One, Izuku struggling uselessly the whole time. Shigaraki deposits him none too gently at his master's feet, the carpet beneath him cushioning his short fall. Izuku is right in front of All for One now, on his knees in front of the most dangerous villain the world has ever seen, the one that nearly killed All Might, the one that will surely kill him once he's through with him. He doesn't believe All for One's bullshit about not killing kids for a single second. Shigaraki himself said that he'd kill Izuku as soon as All for One is healed, so who does he think he's fooling? A large hand reaches towards him, and every muscle in Izuku's body instantly goes rigid. Skin, 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 skin. No, wait, he's still bruised, technically bruised, even if they haven't shown yet. He knows anatomy, broken capillaries from punches, from sparring, delayed darkening due to increased blood flow and reduced pain and inflammation from the hot springs, but that doesn't mean the damage isn't there. He's fine. He's fine because he's not fine. He's injured. It won't work. It won't work. Please don't work. The hand drops down on his hair. He lets out a shaky exhale, dizzy. All for One is silent for a long moment, then retracts his hand and says, Tamura-kun, please remove his gag. What? What? Shigaraki exclaims, but I understand the precaution. All for One interrupts, but it is not necessary. Remove the gag. Izuku isn't sure what the hell is going on or what he did, but a spark of hope flickers in his chest. Shigaraki grumbles uncertainty but obeys, bending down behind him and untying the gag. As soon as the fabric slips out of his mouth, Izuku takes his lower lip between his teeth and bites down until he feels a sharp burst of pain. Hey! Shigaraki snatches his face in a harsh grip, but it's too late. Izuku has never been so happy to bleed in his life. He knows, the bruises are there, but it's too uncertain. This cut, this blood, is all the reassurance he needs right now. Yanking his jaw out of Shigaraki's grasp, Izuku turns to All for One and hisses with as much fury and hatred as he can muster with his hoarse voice, I will never heal you. He spits blood on the villain's well-pressed pants. Shigaraki makes a move as if he's about to turn him to dust, which he probably is, but All for One merely laughs. It's short, and amused, but it sends chills down Izuku's spine. What spirit? He sounds delighted. Shigaraki grabs Izuku roughly and Izuku hisses, twisting and snapping his teeth like a feral animal. All for One watches calmly from his chair. Tamura-kun, what did I say about treating our guest nicely? What? Shigaraki is in the midst of pinning a thrashing Izuku to the ground. But sensei, he's going to help me, All for One explains patiently. He's going to help you too. Never. Izuku snarls, voice sounding like he's grating sheets of sandpaper together. Why don't you help him sit up? It's not a suggestion. Shigaraki grits his teeth but reluctantly obeys, giving Izuku a withering glare as he clambers off the boy and pulls him to his knees, shoving him in front of his master's feet. Izuku kneels before All for One, trying and failing to hide the way his entire body quivers with fear as he glares up at the villain. A smirk dances on All for One's lips, a familiar one, the same one he sees when he knows people aren't taking him seriously, when he's not a threat and yeah, he's not stupid. All for One is definitely the bigger threat out of the two of them. Out of everyone in the room, Izuku's probably the least threatening person. Doesn't make it any less infuriating. All for One's hand reaches down again and Izuku flinches away from it, breath hitching. A pause, then the hand falls. Izuku just barely stifles a sigh of relief. Healing is such a noble profession, All for One rumbles. Some might say it's similar to heroics, but I wouldn't be so quick to label it as such. Heroes are so often hypocritical, maintaining peace through violence, saving lives by taking lives. But you use your quirk simply to heal. You are lucky, Midoriya Izuku. You have a unique position in this corrupt civilization. You are neutral. As a healer, you have a duty to the preservation of life and only that. Izuku knows where he's going with this, and he won't be fooled. I won't heal you, he rasps. Didn't your mentor ever tell you it's not your place to choose sides in the war between heroes and villains? His place. Indignation sparks in Izuku's heart. I won't heal you, he repeats. All for One's lip curls upwards. I know. Izuku blinks, taken aback. Then why? Consider it food for thought, the man interrupts. Then, your quirk is very curious. Baffled by the sudden change in topic, Izuku blanks. Huh? All for One tilts his head, as if analyzing Izuku even though he doesn't have any eyes. Admittedly, I'm no expert on healing quirks, but from what I do know about them, most seem to work by stimulating some part of a person's natural healing ability, he muses, but yours seems to be more of a transfer of your own organic energy. Very self-sacrificial. His lips turn down and the scars on his face contort into a frown. Rather detrimental to you. However, is it not? You must be particularly susceptible to quirk exhaustion. Izuku's stomach turns uneasily. How do you know all that? Ah, when I touched you on the head earlier. All for One gestures with his hand. It's a less flashy quirk of mine, but incredibly useful to me. It allows me to know everything there is to know about a person's quirk so long as I touch them. Izuku swallows and rasps, "Then you'll know mine won't work if I'm injured." The man chuckles deep in his chest, pleasantly entertained, as if he's a teacher patiently explaining something blatantly obvious to a toddler. "Yes, I assume that's probably your body's natural attempt at self-preservation, to use your energy to heal yourself before you heal others." The air seems to still then. Something in the room changes, shifts, sending a tingling sensation shooting up Izuku's spine. "But it doesn't matter to me," All For One declares. "All I need is to take that energy." Izuku's mind scratches to a halt. Before he can even begin to wonder what he meant by that, All For One raises his hand once more. Then, his fingers begin to transform, turning black with red veins running along them, before they suddenly shoot out towards Izuku. He screams when the jagged edges plunge into his chest, but to his surprise there's no pain. To his horror, however, he feels his quirk activate against his will. The energy is draining out of him through the spikes, going into All For One, healing him. Terror streaks through Izuku. Panicking, he desperately tries to shut off the flow, his scrambled mind hastily conjuring up the image of the hose and squeezing it down. It does nothing. For the first couple of seconds, he thinks it's because he's too busy freaking out to focus, but then he realizes he's not doing anything. He has no grasp at all over his quirk. It's not like any other time when he's tried to shut it off. He has no control over this. His energy is being torn from him, he can't even move. His breathing grows thin and ragged as adrenaline bursts in his veins to protect him. No, 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 this can't be happening. Every part of his body is screaming at him, telling him to run, to escape, because this is wrong, so wrong and unnatural, but he can't. He's trapped. He's trapped. His life is being drained. What he spent so long giving out of generosity is being stolen from him and he can't stop. The jagged spikes stare out of his chest just before he can pass out. He tips forward with a strangled cry, slumping against some unknown object, body limp as a ragdoll. His chest heaves as he gasps for breath, little whines and whimpers escaping his throat with every inhale and exhale. Wide, blown eyes are glazed over with shock as his whole body shudders violently from head to toe, muscles twitching and spasming uncontrollably. Black dots dance at the edges of his vision and for a few seconds it's all he can do to just cling to consciousness. Head spinning, unable to do anything besides remaining slumped over and struggling to catch his breath, trembling with weakness and trying to think through his numb mind, what the fuck just happened? Something's happening above him. Sounds are muffled, filtering through his ears like they're full of cotton, but he thinks he can hear machinery being fiddled with. Metal on metal, and then All For One's mechanical breathing is no longer echoing throughout the room. "How do you feel, sensei?" Shigaraki's voice asks. There's a long, deep inhale, followed by an exhale. "Better than I have in years." Izuku goes cold. Tears spring to his eyes. Oh God. What has he done? A hand brushes over his hair. Izuku freezes, staring down at the floor with wide, unseeing eyes, his vision blurring with tears as he waits for something. He doesn't know what. Whatever hell is next. But the hand just strokes his hair gently, fingers carding through his curls as he quivers and shakes with barely stifled sobs. "Thank you, Midoriya Izuku," All For One says in a sickeningly grateful tone. "I never thought I would feel this alive again." Izuku's shoulders tremble violently as tears pour out of his eyes and splash onto the carpet beneath him. A choked, strangled sob tears its way out of his burning throat. Fingers scratch his scalp gently, All For One shushing him in a mockery of comfort. "Oh, I know, I'm sorry," he soothes, voice dripping like honey. "That was rough. But I am a man of my word, you see? There's not a scratch on you, that's my doing." Jagged fingers piercing his chest. Izuku flinches at the mere memory. But when he looks down at himself, there's no puncture wounds, no blood, nothing. It's confusing, it doesn't make any sense, he can't wrap his addled brain around it, but right now, he's just relieved. Still, He can't contain the gasps and whimpers that escape his mouth as he struggles to get himself back under control. He's never felt so dizzy and weak before in his life. His forehead drags against the fabric of whatever he's slumped against, and it takes his rattled brain a moment to realize that he's leaning against All for One's knee. He feebly tries to move away, but the man's hand stops him, the weight of it alone being more than enough to keep his head in place. There, that's good, catch your breath. All for One's gentle voice is so fake, so condescending, but all Izuku can feel is grateful that torture is over. You've done so well already. Such a marvelous quirk you have, Midoriya. An absolute treasure. I hope you know how blessed you are. Izuku doesn't feel very blessed. He doesn't feel blessed at all. Right now, he would gladly trade this quirk if it meant he wouldn't be here, crumpled on the floor in front of this horrendous villain, too weak to even move his finger. Finger scratch against his scalp. A pathetic, broken whine escapes his throat. I'll give you time to rest, All for One says quietly. It seems that I am not completely healed. With my other quirk, I could tell that you only have a limited amount of energy you can give at a time. It makes sense, I suppose. Our bodies are vastly different, and yours does need a certain amount of energy to perform basic functions. I have time to spare, so I left you with just enough energy to keep you conscious. He pats Izuku's head lightly, as if he did him a big favor, or showed him some giant act of mercy. Tamura-kun will take you back to the bar and return you here once you've regained your strength. Izuku's heart hammers in his chest. Tears blur his vision, but he chokes back the ball of panic that lodges in his throat, desperately tries to focus his scrambled mind on something, anything that can help him. All for One said he was not completely healed. That's a small blessing the universe has decided to grant Izuku. A respite. That means he has a brief window of time to figure something out, some solution, some way to fix this nightmare. Or it could just be delaying the inevitable. Like dangling a carrot of hope in front of him only to yank it away at the last second. He hears Shigaraki approach behind him. But before the villain can grab him, All for One speaks. Do you understand now, Tamura-kun? The footsteps stop. Sensei. All for One's hand on Izuku's head continues to idly stroke. Why I was so eager to have Midoriya-kun here join us. Shigaraki pauses. You needed him to heal you. All for One tsks. It's kind of amazing how much disappointment he can put into such a single, short sound. Another pause, longer. Izuku can't see Shigaraki, but he can hear his shoes shuffle slightly. He sounds frustrated. Uncertain. You don't want him to heal any heroes. All for One takes a long, deep breath. One that he probably hasn't been able to take in a while. Then, he says, they say that healers are the backbone of the hero society. And it's true. Healing quirks are already so rare to begin with, but once someone is born with one, their life immediately belongs to the heroes. And since the heroes monopolize them so possessively, they're the ones to get to live to see another day while villains are often left to heal slowly or die after a fight. That's not true. Izuku wants to shout at him, but the heavy palm presses into the back of his head. Fear silences him. But he healed All Might. Shigaraki hisses. We had a plan to kill him and this brat ruined everything. And that shit he pulled at the Mulga. There's the sound of nails scratching against skin. I'm going to destroy him once he's done healing you. All for One touched disapprovingly. Tamura-kun, he was able to do in mere seconds what the doctor hasn't been able to do in years. It's unwise to waste such a valuable resource. If you cannot see that, then I have vastly overestimated your progress. His voice takes a darker, warning tone that sends a shiver up Izuku's spine. Shigaraki merely grumbles petulantly. I know. And as for them All for One chuckles. You really shouldn't have expected him to come quietly. Even the most docile of creatures will bite when frightened, however. His large hand slides off of Izuku's head, trailing down to wrap around his throat and gently rub at his scar. Izuku's breath stutters. I think he learned his lesson, All for One rumbles. Nausea churns in Izuku's stomach. His skin crawls where All for One touches him and he trembles even harder in his grasp, but he notices something that gives him pause. He can feel All for One's energy. Izuku blinks. His lip throbs where he bit it. He's injured, but his quirk is still activated. No, not quite. His energy is not flowing out of him, even though All for One is still injured, still touching him. It feels more like when he shuts his quirk off halfway through healing someone, when he can sense their own natural energy attempting to heal their injuries. All for One's energy, swirling around numerous points in his body, specific points, like his right hip, left hand, left knee, chest, face. Weak points. Izuku's eyes widen. Despite his exhaustion, he musters up enough strength to yank his neck out of All for One's light grip. A laugh rumbles in the villain's broad chest. My, you are a feisty one, aren't you? He sounds amused. Captured and trembling in fear, and yet, you still have a fighting spirit. I can see why All Might likes you. He's a brat, Shigaraki says dryly. Can't you just take his quirk and give it to one of your subordinates? Now, Tamura-kun, there's more to healing than having a good quirk for it, All for One replies chidingly. Midoriya-kun has valuable medical knowledge, and he knows his quirk better than anyone. No, his quirk will remain with him. Despite the situation, Izuku can't help feeling slightly relieved at the words. Shigaraki makes a displeased noise in his throat. It seemed to me that you enjoyed his company when you told me of your encounter at the mall, All for One adds, before things went south, of course. Didn't you tell me he helped you realize your conviction to kill All Might? He did. All for One pauses patiently. He's been so helpful already. Shigaraki scratches his neck idly. Yeah, I guess. Meanwhile, Izuku's mind is trying to connect the dots. He feels like he's missing something here. So you do understand then? All for One asks. Shigaraki grumbles again. I need a clear answer, Tamura-kun. Fine. Shigaraki huffs, exasperated. I suppose our party could use a white mage. I'll keep him. Izuku freezes. What? Good. All for One sounds pleased. I'm glad to see you maturing, Tamura-kun. Providing a healer for your League of Villains will make you seem like a fine and capable leader. They're a rarity amongst villain groups, and with one you'd be able to more easily support larger ranks. Izuku has never mentally backpedaled so hard in his life. Wait a minute. He's being recruited for the League of Villains? Actually, Shigaraki turning him to dust doesn't sound so bad anymore. Go on and take him back to the bar then, All for One says. Return him to me once he's regained his strength. Sure. Shigaraki drags a limp Izuku to his feet. Having been too weak to lift his head earlier, it's the first time he's able to catch a glimpse of All for One since being forced to heal him. His face is still heavily scarred with no eyes and there doesn't seem to be much of an external change except for a significant reduction in the amount of tubes and wires attached to him, so Izuku assumes most of the healing he did was internal. Makes sense, his quirk automatically targets the worst injuries first. He noticed the change in All for One's breathing before and after the healing, and while he's pretty sure he didn't regrow any lungs, there's a good chance the majority of his energy went into repairing whatever damage was in his respiratory system. But All for One still has a lot of injuries. They're different from All Might's. He was, and still is, literally missing organs, which caused him to become emaciated and weak. All for One is missing less organs, the most significant ones being his eyes, but he's more physically damaged. But what's most important is that he won't be healed quickly. Like All for One said, Izuku has a limited amount of energy he can give, and All for One is a big guy with big injuries, so if he was being honest about not wanting Izuku to pass out from quirk exhaustion whenever he heals him, then they're going to have to take it slow, do multiple healing sessions. Which means Izuku has time. Not right now, though. Shigaraki is dragging him away from all for one, and Izuku doesn't have any more time to think before he's being warped back to the bar. As soon as his feet are on wooden floor once more, Shigaraki shoves him against Dabi's chest. Strap him to the chair or something. He lets go, and Izuku's knees immediately buckle, unable to support his own weight. Dabi hastily catches him, arching a brow at his trembling form. The fuck happened to him? I thought he was going to heal your boss? Spinner asks. He did. Shigaraki waves a hand dismissively. His quirk drains his energy apparently. As he talks, Spinner comes up to Dabi's side and helps him haul Izuku over to a heavily padded chair. Shigaraki watches them, tilting his head after a moment. You don't need to bother too much with those restraints, I guess. Brat's too weak to cause much trouble. Dabi doesn't appear to be very convinced and ties his wrists and ankles to the chair. Still, that's extremely forgiving considering the ridiculous amount of bindings and straps there are on this thing. Izuku slumps over, shivering and sniffling as his hair falls in his face, hopefully hiding his tear-streaked cheeks. Spinner cranes his head to peer at him. What about his lip? It's bleeding. Didn't you say Sensei figured out how to force his quirk? Shigaraki explains, but he can't heal him all at once because it's like a transfer of his own energy, and if he loses too much then he'll pass out. So, I'll bring him back to Sensei once he regains his strength. He goes to sit at the bar. Izuku's skin prickles under the curious gazes of the other villains. A transfer of energy? The masked man, the one that turned him into a marble, tilts his head. That's not exactly what I had expected. Your sensei can force quirks? A man in a gray and black bodysuit asks Shigaraki. Cool. Suspicious. When are we going to meet this guy? Completely ignoring the sudden change in tone mid-sentence, Shigaraki replies coolly, I said he figured out how to force his quirk. And eventually. Maybe. Izuku eyes him from under the fringe of his hair. The wording was strange. He files that away for later. Right now he has to worry about the teenage girl that's bouncing up to him and plopping herself down in his lap. I'm Toga. She announces cheerfully. Her flashing yellow eyes are hollows of madness. You're so much cuter when you bleed. Can I make him bleed more? She reaches for his face and presses her thumb down on his cut lip. Pain sparks and he grunts, feebly tugging his chin out of her grip. She giggles and doesn't let go, pressing harder until he feels blood dribbling down his chin. So pretty. She chirps. Lunatic. Dabi mutters under his breath. Trembling with weakness, Izuku keeps trying to pull away, steadily getting more and more annoyed, but Toga keeps toying with him. A few seconds later, the masked man sighs. If he needs to regain his energy in order to heal Shigaraki-san's sensei, then injuring him further would only delay that. Toga puffs up her cheeks and pouts. Oh, you're no fun. Her thumb stills on Izuku's lip, irritated and indignant. He snaps at it. She quickly pulls it away and grins, revealing much sharper fangs. Hee, you're so funny. She giggles, sounding absolutely delighted. I like him, Damura-kun. Can we keep him? Sure. Shigaraki grunts. Toga blinks. She turns to stare at Shigaraki, as do the rest of the villains. Wait, seriously? Spinner asks. I thought you hated him? The magnetic woman asks. Weren't you just trending about being so excited that you finally get to kill him for messing up your plans to kill All Might? Dabi sounds bored. Wait, what? You were going to kill him? Spinner exclaims, eyes wide. Well, after he healed his boss, yeah. Dabi shrugs. Spinner whips his head between him and Shigaraki rapidly. I didn't know this. That's messed up. You can't kill a healer. He protests, especially not that one. He was acknowledged by Stain himself. Izuku blinks. He was? Shigaraki's eye twitches between the fingers of his mask. Did you not just hear what I said? I'm not going to kill him. Anymore, Spinner shoots back. Kurogiri raises his hands in a silent request for peace. I think what your comrades would like to know is the reason behind your sudden change of heart, he says amicably. The villains nod. Shigaraki sniffs. I figured it would be obvious, he says nonchalantly. Healers are rare and are prized by the Hero Society. We kill two birds with one stone by keeping the brat. 1. We get to have a healer. That's a plus for us and one less healer for the heroes. 2. I've just seen the way this kid's quirk works, and it's like nothing I've ever seen before. Nothing like anyone's ever seen before according to Sensei. It works differently than most healing quirks. He's a healer prized amongst healers, and that's gonna make it look even worse for when this hits the news tomorrow morning. The dismembered hand hides his face, but the malicious grin is evident in his voice. Discomfort gnaws at Izuku's insides. Spinner has eyes at Shigaraki. And your little personal vendetta against him? How do we know you won't turn him to dust the moment he pisses you off again? Shigaraki clicks his tongue and rolls his eyes. Oh, don't be so dramatic, it was hardly a vendetta, he says sarcastically. He escaped me once and it irked me. We have him now. I'm not so immature that I would deprive my comrades of such a valuable resource, over a mere trivial matter. Izuku blinks, incredulous. That sounds exactly like what he would do. Actually, that's exactly what he was going to do if it hadn't been for All For One convincing him otherwise. He's acting like he's the one who came up with the idea to keep Izuku. And he's acting like he's so mature for doing so. Still, his allies seem impressed somehow. Good. The masked man nods, in approval. Bravo. Bodysuit claps. Such character development. Suspicious. A surprisingly mature decision, Dabi mutters to himself, eyebrows raised. It would be nice to have a healer on our side, Kurogiri muses, and such a powerful one too. We've always had to wait so long whenever we've been injured. This will greatly increase our recovery time after any negative encounter with heroes. Izuku is starting to get tired of them talking about him like he's not in the room. Healing All For One is one thing, he didn't have a choice in that matter, but healing these guys? Mustering up his strength, he lifts his trembling head to glare at the villains. I'll never heal you, he croaks, voice hoarse and thin. The hellish day's events have left the traumatized muscles of his throat burning. All eyes land on him. Damn, he sounds like shit, Dabi says. Course he does, Shigaraki-san turned his throat to dust, the magnetic woman says. Shigaraki scoffs, hey, he turned his own throat to dust. Moron. Hey. She scowls. I meant him. Spinner glances at Izuku. Did anyone actually hear what he said? I did. Toga waves her hand from where she's still sitting on Izuku's lap. He said, I'll never heal you. She changes her voice to mock his and giggles. Izuku glares. Shigaraki laughs too. Well, it's a good thing now we don't need you to be willing, then. He leers through his mask. Izuku stiffens. What does he mean by that? Only All For One can force him to use his quirk. Right? With those finger things. Unless. Shigaraki knows All For One a lot better than Izuku does. Maybe he can force Izuku's quirk to work not only on himself but on other people too? What will Izuku do then? Toga's palm comes up to cup his cheek. Izuku flinches away instinctively. Oh, no, none of that. She grabs his face, pulling it close to hers as she grins, pointy teeth glinting. We're going to be best friends, aren't we? You're ours now. Isn't it great? We're going to have so much fun together. Izuku fruitlessly struggles in her grasp, but he's still incredibly weak from All For One's forced healing, just barely teetering on the edge of unconsciousness. But even if he can't physically defy them, he'll never bow verbally. I'm not yours. The heroes will come for me. Shigaraki laughs again. No, they won't. The League of Villains stole us, precious young healer. Just you wait, soon the public will turn on the heroes. They'll be too busy saving their own skins to try and save you. And if they do, well. He chuckles, darker. Sensei will have no trouble dealing with them now thanks to your quirk. Izuku's stomach sinks. A hard ball forms in his throat and he averts his gaze downwards, struggling to suppress the rising emotions within him. He feels Shigaraki's eyes boring holes into the top of his head. Thankfully, however, it seems that even villains need to sleep. The masked man and bodysuit somehow convinced Toga to leave Izuku alone, and only the former and Kurogiri are left to watch over Izuku throughout the night. Even though he's not completely alone, Izuku is at least grateful he's away from the arguably worst members of the league. With no distractions, he can finally think. Except he's so tired. This has been just about the longest day of his life. He started his morning tangled in Todoroki's arms, then had an emotional sparring session with Shinsu, then got chased around the forest by numerous villains, then had his energy forcibly drained from him just to the brink of quirk exhaustion, and now he's about to spend the first of who knows how many nights with the League of Villains, who he's just been recruited to become their unwilling healer. He was just supposed to be at a summer camp with his friends. A sob rises in his abused throat. He chokes it back, forcing it and all of the emotions that come with it back down. The wave of panic that he's grown all too familiar with within just the past couple of months alone makes itself known in the rapid pounding of his heartbeat, in the blood rushing in his ears, in the way he trembles for a reason other than pure and utter exhaustion. It's so dangerously easy to lose himself to the fear, to drown in it, and he already feels himself slipping, so he finds himself sinking his teeth into his bottom lip. Pain flares and it grounds him, providing him with enough of an anchor to guide him back to the surface. He can't allow himself to drown yet. He is in a situation in which he desperately needs to keep a level head if he wants to escape. There are no heroes here right now, he needs to rely on himself. He needs to analyze his situation. He needs to make a plan. He needs to act on it, if he can. He needs to be careful. He needs to be brave. He needs. Izuku bites his lips so hard he tastes blood on his tongue. Squeezing his eyes shut, he can't help letting a few stray tears dribble down his cheeks. The gnarled, cringing feeling in his gut uncurls ever so slightly. He inhales shakily. This is not a... Izuku has never faced a challenge like this before in his life. But he needs to be brave. So he allows himself to cry once, their soft sobs. Controlled. He does not let himself spiral into a panic attack. He locks all of his fear and anxiety and hurt into his tears and cleanses his body of the feeling. Kurogiri and the masked man don't say a word as he quietly sniffles and hiccups. And once the tears have run out, once he's able to catch his breath and hold his head above the water, he hardens himself. And he begins to plan. His vision starts to go fuzzy at the edges, but he forces himself to cling to consciousness. No, he can't pass out just yet. He needs to organize his thoughts, organize what he learned, what he gathered. Surely he learned a lot today. What did he learn? He racks his exhausted brain, going back through his encounter with All For One, trying to make a list. All For One doesn't know that All Might isn't completely healed. All For One is blind. All For One is not and will not be completely healed for an unknown amount of time. Izuku can sense All For One's weak points. It's a shorter list than he thought. The latter three might change if Izuku doesn't get rescued or doesn't escape before All For One demands another healing session from him. So what can he do with this information? His mind draws a blank. Obviously, he can't do anything. Izuku is a mere pebble amongst the thundering torrent of gushing water that is All For One. He can't even begin to dream to pit himself against him. No, it's a relief knowing that All For One is still injured. That Izuku didn't just completely ruin everything that All Might and all the previous holders of One For All had worked so hard to achieve. That there's still a chance to fix this. He's all too aware of the fatigue pulling heavy at his bones, the temptation of sleep growing stronger. Having been drained to the brink of exhaustion, it'll probably take him an entire day at the very least in order to regain his stamina. That's plenty of time for the heroes to come rescue him, right? Surely they'll find him, before All for One does that to him again? Izuku shudders, squeezing his eyes shut at the memory of jagged fingers piercing his chest, of his own quirk, his own energy, his own life being forced out of him against his will. God, he doesn't want to go through that again. Having his energy torn from him. He doesn't know how much he'll All for One next time. His quirk automatically targets the worst injuries. He doesn't know how much stronger he'll get, if it'll be too strong. No. He has at least a day of rest. Something needs to happen before then. All Might has to fight All for One before then, because if he doesn't rescue Izuku in time, he can't think about that. The heroes will come for him. Screw what Shigaraki said, he knows they must be already working to find him. He has to trust in their ability, and he has to ignore the traitorous voice in the back of his head that whispers, what if they don't find me in time? In the meantime, he needs to gather information. This is an active situation, constantly changing and developing at every second. He needs as much information as he can get in order to adapt. There's so much he doesn't know about All for One and the League. If there's some way he can escape or, at least buy himself more time for the heroes to arrive before All for One calls for him, then he needs to find it. But how? The obvious answer is the League. They're the only source of information for him right now. But he can't just start asking questions, they'll become suspicious. Especially Shigaraki, despite his saying otherwise. The Greenet has no doubt that the villain still harbors some hostility towards him. Besides, he gets the feeling that the other League members don't really know much about All for One anyways. The interaction between Shigaraki and the man in the bodysuit, who he heard Toga later refer to as Twice, has Izuku thinking that Shigaraki seems to be keeping his comrades in the dark to some degree. Izuku needs to find out just how much, or how little, they know. Part of him wonders if they'd follow Shigaraki if they knew how horrifyingly powerful his sensei really was, if they knew he could take away all their quirks in the blink of an eye. What matters, though, is that they're loyal to him now. How will he get information from them without outright asking? He can't imagine he'd be very good at manipulation. Kaken has always complained he wears his heart on his sleeve, and even Todoroki once said something about him being too soft. Having a soft heart won't benefit you when it comes to villains. Izuku huffs silently. Yeah, he knows that. Obviously. It wasn't that he had a soft heart back then, it's just. Now, I know that the media and the news and no doubt your school has taught you to adore heroes and hate villains. But you need to understand this, we, as healers, are a neutral party. Above all else, our duty is to save lives. Hero or villain, good or bad, that doesn't matter to us. We are separate from that. We cannot let our personal feelings on a matter get in the way of our work. It's not our place to judge the value of life based on the actions of the individual. For healers, all life is equal. Do you understand? Izuku frowns, Kami's words echoing in his head. Why is he thinking of this now? You are lucky, Midoriya Izuku. You have a unique position in this corrupt civilization. You are neutral. As a healer, you have a duty to the preservation of life and only that. Izuku's frown turns into a scowl, his stomach curling with bitter repulsion. He shouldn't be surprised that All for One would be so disgustingly manipulative, twisting everything to his advantage. And then didn't your mentor ever tell you it's not your place to choose sides in the war between heroes and villains? And wasn't that infuriating? His place. As if he has no purpose other than to sit quietly and use his quirk on whatever sorry injured fool gets thrown at him. And the thing that pisses him off the most is that as much as he hates to admit it to himself, there's an inkling of truth behind it. He knows Kami didn't mean it that way, but it's so easy to see it when All for One twists his words just so. And then it gets him to start thinking of whenever Recover Girl would tell him not to worry about things that don't concern him, to leave it to the heroes. Well, there's no heroes here right now. He gives himself a mental shake, struggling to force away the fatigue fogging his mind. It won't do him any good to dwell on All for One too long. That villain is a master of manipulation. Just thinking of the smirk on his face when he was telling him of his place makes Izuku's blood boil. That amused, absolutely unconcerned smirk, the one that tells him he's not a threat, that he's not even being taken seriously? Because why would anyone ever feel threatened by Izuku? He's just a healer, he doesn't have a combative quirk, he can't even protect himself, let alone hurt anyone. Never underestimate the power of being underestimated. Shinsu's voice drawls in his head. If your opponent is stupid enough to assume that you're weak, take advantage of that. Izuku blinks. He's just a healer. You don't need to bother too much with those restraints, I guess. Brat's too weak to cause much trouble. His lips curl upwards. He's just a healer. The villains look at him and see a helpless boy without a combative quirk. They see someone they can use. That's okay. He can play that role.